Got my mum mug happening here.
Right on. Yeah, I got one. Well, the wife's got, I don't know if you can see it there.
Ah, nice. Canadian Libertarian.
Well, it's just she's got one of those things. Have you ever heard of them called the Cricket? It's a thing that she can print stuff off from the computer, like not a 3D printer thing, but it's. Whoop! I got to mute.
Yeah, I got to mute too. I'm getting a wicked echo. Okay, there we go.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah.
Right.
So she can print pretty much anything off on that. Anyway, so we're alive here now. So we got a few people that's already joined the chat. Anyways, my main thing, obviously, Tim, to have this discussion with you, is I was watching your video with you and David. And by the way, I think I might have missed one or two, but I pretty much watched all of your videos, and you guys do.
So you're the guy. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm that one guy. No, I'm just kidding. No, I just joke. Funny though, because it's something that actually ties right in line with the. I actually, when I see that your YouTube channel has actually, let me put this up here right now, just for the heck of it, is because you definitely deserve a lot more subscribers. Here we go.
Yeah, we should probably do some marketing and put it out there. But I find these podcasts we do to be more like, I need to get stuff off my chest. I need someone to talk to, and so that's the benefit to me. But we make them available publicly, but we should probably put them out more, do a bit more marketing, because I do think we make a lot of good points, and there's a lot of people that need to hear the message, and a lot of libertarians even aren't maybe entirely sure how to argue for something or debate something, or what the position should be, how to think clearly about something. And I've been thinking about these things for 15 years pretty deeply, and arguing about them and debating them, and I've been corrected a number of times. So I've got the benefit of having a lot of experience behind me. So I think that probably is valuable to some libertarians. So I should probably do a little bit more marketing, get it out there a bit more.
Yeah. Well, of course, what you're going to run into. Well, let me just actually, since we are on the topic of that, is, obviously in reference to the PPC is, I don't know if I actually want to start right here, right now on this, but basically is, I got, with the PBC, actually got quite a bit of extra growth on my channel, but it also, I don't know, right now with some hindsight, if I weigh the benefits and the pitfalls that came with having people that weren't just libertarian,
right.
Yeah, I was popular guy when I was supporting the PBC, and trying to do my thing and trying to be pragmatic and that whole approach. But as a consequence of that, I've watched after the election was over, and as you've seen, no success whatsoever, obviously. But apparently now I'm back into canceled, part of the cancel culture of being a real libertarian again, right? It's like everyone's kind of left me in the dust. So because a lot of them obviously would have obviously identified mostly as conservatives, so that did tend to be an issue I encountered.
Well, it's one thing. It'd be great if you could get a bunch of conservatives watching your channel, and then your goal of like trying to convert them, but they're not there to be converted. They're there to go to church and be preached. It's like the choir being preached to, right? And I think it's just a different thing. So politics done the pragmatic way is kind of like you're playing team sports, and you support your team, and your team PPC or conservative or whatever. And so you go with the people that are supporting your team, even if you don't necessarily agree with them. You're not there to debate or to think more clearly or to communicate big ideas. You're there to figure out how you can get the most votes. And so you're curating a different kind of audience when you're doing that, right? You're curating people that are in the business of trying to get votes, and they're not necessarily the most receptive to having their ideas challenged. That kind of audience. So maybe that's a pitfall, but I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to attract statists to your channel. In fact, I think that's probably a noble endeavor. Like, we want more people, we're trying to convert people into libertarians. And, I think that is the most important thing we can do right now. If we want a more limited government, the biggest metric of success is how many people are you making libertarians? And, I just don't see any way around it. It sucks because we all want a quick win. We want an easy way, and voting seems like that would be the easy way. If we could just like get some people in power, just play the political game, tell people what they want to hear, soft pedal the message, or, whatever, and get in there. Well, then we could have some real success. But unfortunately, I don't think it's that easy. I think it's got to be a grind. It's got to be a slog, and we got to look at the long game. I just don't see any way around it. But
yeah, I'm just going to speak from my own personal experience, obviously. But the number one thing I think I encountered is the fact, and I'm very pointed in pointing out the fact that I don't play the tribalism, the collectivism, I got to join with team A or team B, like the left-right paradigm. Right. Like, I love the whole political, the little political quiz. I like the idea of authoritarianism up here, libertarianism down here, right? Forget about the left, right? I mean, that's beside, let's get to the point where we're trying to decrease the authoritarianism. But yep. If you do what I do and you suggest that you're not willing to align with the tribe, then you are literally, you are considered an outcast. Like you say, they'll use you for your vote, or if you can carry any favor for them. Like I interviewed lots of the PPC candidates, and mostly what it wasn't necessarily, I don't think that they were necessarily interested in the ideas per se. They were interested in using someone that had a decent amount of reach as a means to espouse their ideas. And I think that's the big problem we run into as libertarians is we have, three core tenets of the philosophy, which is basically self-ownership, property rights, and the non-aggression principle. The problem when you're dealing with people, and like I say, I'm with you. I'm on board, is you got to reach to the stage. You need these people, to adopt these kind of ideas that we talk about. But when you're talking about political, and this is why I want to get to this radicalism stuff, is it's the message, right? And the messaging is what matters. It's the ideas and the messaging that matters. And as a libertarian trying to function within the PPC, my voice was obscured. I mean, I had a decent reach, but it was still obscured by the fact that there was multiple messages being presented to the people. So I actually kind of understand why the PPC lacked the success that they did, because you didn't have a consistent unified message. You basically had a bunch of people that were mostly sick and tired of Trudeau or the establishment parties in terms of the conservatives, like that were franchised with the conservatives. And they were just looking at getting rid of one or the other. But what were the ideas promoted? Pretty minimal, to be honest with you. Or the ones that seemed to gravitate to, like a lot of people to the party, was Maxime, obviously the reduction of immigration. But to me, a lot of them was just the sheer fact that they were fearful of people of different backgrounds coming to the country. It wasn't because of the reason, like I'm against
for sure
too. But just like you and I are the reason why we're against mass immigration has nothing to do with what the people are, where they come from, the color of their skin, any of that. It has to do with the state forcefully redistributes wealth. And the more people you bring in here, the more harm it's causing on people, the more imposition it's. So to me, it's like, can we reduce the, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, our ultimate motivation is smaller government. It's more freedom. It's more liberty, right? And that's it. And so, if we take one side or the other on the immigration debate, it's always because we're like, okay, what's going to get us more liberty? Is it, do we have to do this in a particular order? Like, do we have to slow down immigration right now, get rid of the welfare state, choke out healthcare, like get rid of all these forced integration programs, and then open up the border? Or, does it matter? Can we do it in no particular order? And, libertarians, like, they often fight amongst each other, whether you're a closed borderist or an open borderist. Well, those two positions are still far closer than, a closed border libertarian is closer to an open border libertarian than they are to a closed border conservative or something like that. Because the border is the least of our worries. It's the private property borders that we care about. It's the borders of my domain, my self, right? And we're trying to limit government here. And so, you got to be kind of careful who your friends are. And the problem is, like, right now we have this growing unrest, right? And it's showing up in populism movements on the left and the right. We have, like, Bernie Sanders is the front runner. We have Donald Trump as president. Both these guys are populists, right? They're populists in different directions, probably. And ultimately, they're just kind of anti-establishment. While we're pro-principle, we have a certain set of principles. So I guess we have some common cause with the populace, in that we hate the establishment too. We always have, but we really love our principles more than we hate the establishment, and that's what we're trying to promote. That's the kind of society we want to see. And these populists, I mean, we saw this, with the yellow vests in France, right? They wanted lower taxes and they wanted free housing and free everything else, right? Well, okay, it's just not a coherent message. It's not a coherent philosophy. It's not something you can get behind, and so I mean, ultimately I think we really have to put the pedal down now and get the message out. And that means like not pulling punches. It's not about, like 15% flat tax is just lower tax. Okay, you're going to tax me at a lower rate. I guess I like that. That's not really communicating a libertarian message.
Right.
Or closing the borders. Again, that's not in and of itself communicating a libertarian message, and it's not making libertarian. So what is the purpose here? The purpose is to try to get power. But again, the problem the PPC had was it was trying to pretend to be principled at the same time it was trying to pretend to be pragmatic, and it kind of failed miserably at both those things. And I say, well, look, if you're going to put up libertarian numbers, because historically, the Libertarian Party in jurisdictions where we run a candidate, we get about 1 to 3% of the vote. So we get about the same that the PPC got in ridings where they ran candidates. So my point is, look, if you're going to put up libertarian numbers, at least have a libertarian message.
Yeah.
But I do think there is some value in having a more principled conservative party putting pressure on the CPC if they can pick up more votes. It's just that doesn't
right.
That doesn't do it for me. I think that inevitably that strategy of trying to win votes is always going to drift back towards the center. It has to drift back towards the center. You have to water down the message continually, or else you drive people out of the party. And so eventually you have to say empty platitudes and let people project their own ideas about what kind of government you're going to be. You can't have clear ideas. If you have clear ideas, you're going to lose people, because there will be people that are immediately critical of that, and they'll jump off board. You can't say I'm against public school, I'm against foreign interventionism, I'm against the drug war. You can't say these things and expect to get votes. Yet if you don't say these things, we can't ever expect to have a smaller government. So you got to kind of choose, in my estimation, what do you want? Do you want votes, or do you want a smaller government? Because chasing votes is going to get you more of the same, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, actually, well, that was actually exactly when I was listening to you and David talk. That was what struck out at me the most. And obviously, if you go all the way back to 2008 and Ron Paul when he was running, it was the outrageous radicalism that he promoted, right? Like, and the Fed. What do you talk?
Right.
It was those things. It wasn't. That's now. Like, and everyone that starts down that journey or that venture is, you're going to start off. It's those shocking revelations that you've never heard anyone say before. It's those things that piqued my interest and got me to, like you say, that basically want to go down that rabbit hole. And what is this guy talking about? I've never heard anybody say such a thing.
Yeah.
So, like you say, it's playing that kind of milquetoast or that middle ground and trying to appeal to status. I mean, it like you say, for a strategy, in terms of trying to get people to more closely align with libertarianism and stuff, or maybe you can have influence on them, sure. But I think a lot of those conversations would be best kept in the pub, or in you're playing pool with each other or something, right? But when you're doing it publicly as a political message, like I say, there has to be something that unifies other than the fact of like the populace, because PPC was. And that's with using like you were actually saying about the Conservative Party. If you think about it now, and now that I'm thinking about it with hindsight, actually, they should have just named it something that was more of a Conservative Party, because that seemed to be, like you say, where Maxime wanted to take the party, was more or less like to challenge the Conservatives in terms of being actual Conservatives, so more or less to have an option for Conservatives, whereas for Libertarians, and you were saying even when you're talking to David, and I would suggest I myself, I think I would have really originally considered myself as a young man come from the left, in terms of I would have identified as liberal, as a young man growing up. So conservatism never really piqued my interest. Now, there are some aspects of conservatism as an adult, obviously, that do appeal to me. But at the end of the day, it's just tribalism. It's what about, to me, it's like, okay, you're still picking team A or team B, but what was it about conservatism that appealed to me? Well, it was the ideas of smaller government, right? Less theft. But that's the thing, like you're saying, if you're going to go down that road of talking about, like, you don't want to quasi rape someone, you want to end rape, right? Like, you can't say we're going to limit rape to just 5 minutes. Right? No, if you think that rape is wrong, if you believe that taxation is theft, which you and I do, which it is, it's not like I just believe it because I'm just thinking mystically, it literally is. So what's the point in watering down that message? Well, the people that's going to hear that message are just going to hear that you're all about theft as well. It's just that you want to, limit theft to it. So it's really not appealing.
Or you adopt the pragmatic mindset, and it kind of puts you in these chains, right? And we've kind of seen this with Bernier all through his career. I mean, he was a separatist in the 90s, and then he was in charge of supply management at one time in the 2000s. He was a foreign interventionist. He was, he voted establishment conservative through his whole time as a member of parliament. And then when he decided to take a run, he's like, okay, where am I going to get the biggest bang for my buck? That's if I adopt a libertarian message. So he ran as a libertarian as opposed to Kelly Leach, the populist, who was anti-immigration, and Bernier was criticizing her that. And then when he left the Conservative Party, he's looking at the political landscape and he's like, okay, where can I get the most traction? Where are the most motivated, disenfranchised people? Well, it's all these populists that don't have a voice anywhere, right? Those are the people I have to attract. So he adjusts his message to that. And that's what you got to do if you're a pragmatist. But pragmatism isn't all that practical. Like if we go back to, let's say, the abolition of slavery, if we were to adopt this pragmatist policy, what we'd have to do is form a political party and say, okay, obviously slavery is really popular right now. We're bucking the status quo. So we have to be very careful in our message. Let's just talk about maybe decreasing slavery by like 5 or 10%. And like say, what we need is like, it's going to be better for our country if we have a little bit more market and a little bit less slavery. Okay. Now, how convincing and how successful or practical would that have been to end slavery? It wouldn't have been at all. Who ended slavery? It was abolitionists who made the radical, principled message: you should not own other people. I don't care if it tanks the GDP. I don't care what the consequences are. Like, the moral case is you don't own other people, period. You make that case over and over again. You build the movement, and eventually the politicians have to act once that movement is built. And so we are the modern day abolitionists, and we're not advocating for 5% less government. We're advocating for abolition of initiatory force, protection of private property, period. The end. Taxation is theft. In fact, it's calling it theft is almost, I feel bad doing it, because, theft is when you take something without looking. But what's happening here is you're threatening to lock people in a cage if they don't hand over their thing, or shoot them down if they don't comply. I mean, those are both theft, but one is far more egregious. So it's one of the most egregious types of theft you can imagine. So we just have to keep making this case and trying to communicate it to people, and understand people are not going to understand this. They're going to be put off by it. It's going to be very uncomfortable for them. It's not going to get us a lot of votes. So we have to have a bit of empathy for people and help them through it, and have some patience and do some persuasion. But, ultimately that is the work I think that has to be done.
Yeah. And actually, when it comes to that, the beautiful thing is, and I've got it all downloaded in PDF and saved on a couple different devices, but in Canada, this is what we should really be doing. And like I say, I'm definitely changing where my allegiances are going to be going forward, because like I say, I tried to be pragmatic. It failed. Hey, at least to me, it was an experiment. Give it a shot. Yeah. Obviously, that's the only way I'm going to know how beneficial this stuff's going to be, just by dipping the toes in the water. But like I said to you before, I do feel bad for the fact that you felt like abandoned, because that was definitely never the case. I was always more of a libertarian than anything that would have to do with the PBC. But like I said, I was just hoping, I just want to see the kinds of things reduced in some way, or at least get Canadians to think about this stuff. But the big thing that I want to mention because you were talking about this, is you mentioned the Dallas Accord when you were talking to David, right? Oh, no, sorry. Back to the is about the income tax. Is every Canadian, I don't know if you want to use this as a strategy yourself, but this is the thing as far as taxation is theft, is you know, you can look it up. You can look right now on Canada, like, what is it, Canada.com or the GC, like it's the actual government website that tells you when the income tax came in as a temporary war measures act, right? So people can read through that and see it's not libertarian literature. It's literally like it comes right from the government. So when, prior to 1917, there was no such thing as an income tax, but you know, 100 years later, people believe that it's just normal that the government takes a portion of your income. Like that should be that should be literally focused on by anyone. Is talk about just 100 years ago, you know, this was a reality that there was no such thing as an income tax, and at least that gets them start to think about the very real fact that, you know, 100 years isn't really that long ago, right? But anyways, actually, you want to reply to that before I go on to what I was going to mention about the Dallas Accord? Go ahead.
No. I mean, I think you summed it up perfectly. I mean, we get immersed in a paradigm we're used to, and then we just can't imagine things any other way, right? I mean, it was the same in the Soviet Union. I mean, there's that old joke about the Soviet ladies, two Soviet ladies standing in line for their bread, for their stale bread, and they're waiting hours in this bread line. And one lady says to the other, complains to the other, man, we're waiting here for hours and all we're going to get is some stale bread. This is BS. The other lady says, how dare you complain? You know that in capitalist countries, the government doesn't even provide their citizens bread.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, over here in capitalist countries where the government doesn't provide us with bread, we've got bread, fresh bread lined up, waiting for us. You know, all of all types. And I mean, the thing is that those Soviet women, they just couldn't understand how food could be produced. Something as vital for your health and for your survival as food. What, you're just going to let this magic market take care of it? I mean, you got to have someone figuring out where the bread's going to go, who's going to produce it. Like, you need a person at the top managing all this stuff. And, you know, they just couldn't wrap their brains around it. And just in the same way, Canadians, we can't wrap our brains around how would this work without taxation? How would this work how would I get healthcare if the government wasn't providing it? You know, all these things are just like part of our paradigm and our zeitgeist, and it's impossible for a lot of us to think outside that. But you know, our job is to try to break that spell that the zeitgeist has over people, I guess. So
yeah, actually, that brings me back to I use this expression quite a bit. Clarity of language gives clarity of mind, right? And clarity of thought. And that is the key thing with libertarians is, and this has been something obviously that, you know, we're standing on the shoulders of lots of intellectual geniuses and people that have thought about this for a long time. And the message, it's all right there. It gets tiring to have to keep repeat it time and time again. Everyone that tries to learn these things, but every question that someone has about, you know, regarding liberty, all these questions have been answered. So it's not really that difficult, other than the fact that, like I say, there's not a party other than the Libertarian Party, which is why, for myself, it's got to be, if I care about liberty, then it's got to be through the Libertarian Party. If you want to deal in the political realm, which we have to, I already, like you were saying, I already acknowledge the fact that you just can't avoid politics because politics doesn't avoid you. So it's got to be a dual pronged strategy. So like you say, culture is definitely the leading driver as far as I'm concerned, but politics is there. So we definitely got, but if you're going to do it, at least be able to give the message in clear and concise so that people aren't, because that's one thing with the PBC is they get so many different messages just based on the candidates. And that's like you were referencing with Davis. Yeah. For your party, and even if I choose to run as a candidate, is everyone's kind of got to at least understand the core premises and principles of libertarianism and not confuse and confound the people so that they understand the message. And it's really not that difficult. Like you say, most of what we have to talk about as adults, we learned basically when we were 5 years old, right? So it's not that we can't get a unified message, but just before you respond to that, something just as simple as the meme that I used to share this, the one that made you quite popular, and you were on Fox News. I remember watching. It was great when I saw you. Holy crap, Tim's on Fox News. Well, you know, with the, I want gay married couples to be able to protect their marijuana plants with guns, right? Even something as simple as that. Now, if you understand what a libertarian is, you understand that, yes, it's encompassing all different aspects of freedom and liberty, basically 5 of them or so into one. But even something as simple as that, I had people comment already just from placing that is, oh, well, 2 of them have already been dealt with. Legalization of marijuana. It's like, well, you're not getting the overarching premise of what that means. So what that means is whether you're right or left, it's the message behind that is it's all about expanding liberty, personal liberty. It's not
Right,
a matter of legalizing marijuana per se. It's about legalizing freedom. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, yeah, it's about getting the message out there, 100%. That's it, and look, we can do it in a way that is, you're right. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, and our job is to try to package those messages in a way that people can understand here and now in the context we're in, where we're arguing about whether YouTube should or shouldn't be able to kick Prager off of its platform, whether we're arguing about these pipelines. Like our message is to try to say, okay, what underlying principle can we refer to resolve this debate and this question? And we have to keep bringing it back to liberty and doing an effective job of communicating that. And so that's the challenge.
Right. No, I'm totally on board. Now, like I was going to try to get to, because you kind of somewhat explained it, but hopefully the people that are in the chat, as well as myself, will kind of get a better understanding of this Dallas Accord. So I assume, based on what you were saying, is people that would predominantly be considered like full-on libertarians or anarchists. Although, actually, let me just point this out. When we say libertarians and anarchists, this is just my own thing. I haven't heard too many other people kind of express this. But what I find is the biggest difference between we libertarians and anarchists, and I do see, actually, it's kind of funny because I do see a lot of us, or a substantial portion of us, it's all anecdotal based on my own personal observations and experience. But libertarians, I think the biggest difference between those of us who identify as libertarians and those who identify as anarchists, predominantly, there are exceptions now, mind you, people like Stefan Molyneux, but anarchists are against the state, and it's okay to be against the state, but just like with Nietzsche and going back to God, it's okay to try to bring down the concept of mysticism, but what the hell do you got to replace it with, right? Now, libertarians aren't, libertarians and anarchists, we fellow travelers 100% of the way in terms of talking about the detriment of the state and all that. But once you've gone anarchist, now people on the left like to identify as anarchists, but a lot of them are also atheists, maybe a little bit hedonistic, right? Right, in their own personal lives. Whereas those of us who, like myself, I'll speak for myself, and maybe even you to a degree, is the reason why I like the term libertarian is, first of all, the philosophy is so tightly knit in terms of the self-ownership, property rights, and NEP. But that's the thing. The flip side of that, in terms of government, right? That's the NEP self. That's a good way in how we can bring down government, just by using those three core tenets and principles. But it has a baked in the cake an inherent morality to it, right? And I guess that's where my Christian upbringing kind of aligns with libertarianism, is because I'm not just against statism. I'm not just against the state. I'm for self-ownership. I'm for property rights, respecting the individual and the sovereignty of the individual and free will and the non-aggression principle. So that's what I think we libertarians, what we kind of should promote even further is yes, we have a lot in common with anarchists, but there is something baked right into the philosophy of liberty that even gives people good moral guidance in terms of how you deal with people, whether you want to use it for reducing the size of the government or just in your own personal life, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that one of the dangers of libertarianism is similar to one of the dangers of atheism, in a sense, in that atheism isn't a positive belief system, right? It's an attitudinal disposition of skepticism towards extraordinary claims about God or gods,
right?
And libertarianism in a lot of ways is kind of the same way. It's an attitudinal disposition of skepticism towards extraordinary claims about the use of force and the morality around it, right? And that this group of people is allowed to take your money without consent. And if we call it taxation, sprinkle a little fairy dust on it, that's okay. But, and so we say, no, there's no fairy dust here. I didn't sign any social contract. Like, where are we getting separate moral categories? If we're saying this is the moral rule, don't hurt people, don't take their stuff, how is it that these people get it? Has anyone run an fMRI scan of their brain? Did they like grow an extra organ in their brain, another prefrontal lobe or something like that gave them this magical right to tax? Like, show us some proof here. So libertarianism rejects these extraordinary moral claims, but unless, but more and more, I'm realizing we have to focus on positive principles, and those positive principles are self-ownership. And the reason we want self-ownership is so that individuals can flourish, right? So that we can maximize our freedom, so that we can chase our own destinies. And that's ultimately the positive message in libertarianism. And we have to maybe organize around that, right? Now, the Dallas Accord, you know, because of this kind of underlying attitudinal disposition of skepticism that libertarians have, where we're constantly in reject those claims mode, right? We're focused on what's wrong with that statement and that statement and that statement. There's an old joke that says, you know, the one thing that a libertarian hates more than conservatives or liberals is other libertarians. We hate them the most, right? Because we argue about the most minute little details, and, you know, and this was apparent very early on, because we're kind of wired to be curmudgeons and skeptics against like all these things, all these people trying to impose these beliefs and control on us. We're just maybe genetically wired that way or whatever. Our personalities maybe are a little different. When we get together in a room and we're like, let's do something about this, yeah, we tend to have a bit of infighting. And this happened very early on in the US. I think the Libertarian Party was founded in like 72 or 73. And by 1974, the infighting was so bad that they came up with this thing called the Dallas Accord, which was just their way of saying, listen, we need a peace treaty here, guys. Like, we agree on like 95 to 98% of everything. Like, we are in more agreement than any other political party and any other group of people, that we fight more. So how about we just agree to focus on all the areas that we actually agree. And when we accomplish that, then we can fight out the remaining 5%. We can split it to, you know, the Libertarian Party and the Anarcho-Capitalist Party or something like that, or the Minarchist Party and the Anarcho-Capitalist Party, and then we can fight it out from there. And so that's what I tend to do. I'm like, you know, let's focus on getting things done here, guys. Like, I know we like to debate. It's fun too. You know, we sit in the pub and it's like a book club, right? Where we debate back and forth, and we love ideas, and we actually want to be right. You know, that's part of why I love to debate. It's like, I love to be shown where I'm wrong, because I've been wrong so many times, and truth matters to me. I want to have the correct beliefs. I want to have the truth. I want to have my beliefs line up with reality. So we love that. But if we're serious about our principles, if we take them seriously, we want to spread them a bit. And that requires getting out there. And wouldn't it be great if we could unify together, work together as a team, because teams get more things done than individuals, right? We can have a synergistic effect, you know, or whatever. Let's work together here. And, you know, that can be a tough thing for libertarians. Like, our biggest strength is also our biggest weakness. Like, I think, you know, I've noticed this about a lot of libertarians. We notice a lot of the BS growing up, right? Like, if you're in high school, you notice the in-group, and they all have this kind of BS thing holding them together, and they're like stupid, and like the teachers, and like we're always on the outside of these groups for whatever reason, and we're like, oh, that's BS and that's BS. And we can look outside and look at all the problems with it. But when we're part of a group, it also makes it very difficult for us to work together. So part of it is like, we're able to be objective. We're able to, because we have nothing socially or emotionally or psychologically invested in being part of a tribe or a group, we're able to see all the BS that holds that tribe together. But because of that, we're able to see the truth, I think, and be a little bit more objective than most people. But also because of that, it's very difficult for us to work together in groups. And so a lot of my message when I speak to libertarian audiences, and I travel across country speaking to other Libertarian Party members, is like, okay, guys, it's that Dallas Accord message. Like, we're an organization that is out there trying to convert people to be libertarians. And let's all get on the same page here. Let's not fight amongst each other. You know, let's save that for behind closed doors. Right now, we're fighting a fire. And, you know, just like when I'm fighting a fire on a fire ground, I'm a firefighter by trade. Even if I have a commander who's an idiot, I follow his orders. I run off his game plan, because we can't all be doing different things. We can't be fighting with each other. We're fighting a fire. The time for squabbling is after the fire's done. Let's go back, do a debrief. Let's argue, figure out what we did wrong, and who's to blame if you must, and all that kind of thing. You know, maybe we need a new commander. Okay, Molon LeBay, take my, you know, position, kind of thing, right? Like, I've made a lot of mistakes as Libertarian Party leader, and I'm going to continue to make mistakes. And there's probably a better guy out there better suited for the job. And I wish that guy would come and take it from me and challenge me, because I think that would make the party better. But you know, that's to me done behind closed doors. And when it's time to focus on the fight, the election time, when we're trying to put out a unified message and convert people, that's the time for unity. And, you know, one of the things that drove me nuts is, as weak as Gary Johnson was and Bill Weld, and they were terrible candidates, like they weren't very good libertarians, you know, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, their supporters would support them no matter what, right? Yeah. When it came to the battle, like Donald Trump grabbing pussies and, you know, banning bump stops and doing whatever, they would explain it away, they would defend him. But Gary Johnson kind of fumbles over some words around Aleppo, has a kind of a nuanced article, or nuanced position on whether Baker should bake a cake or this kind of thing. And immediately libertarians are like, screw this, I'm out of here, kind of thing, right? So, so we need unity, but we also, ultimately what I would like to do is unify around a principled radical message rather. And you know, just imagine if all the libertarians in Canada worked together just once, right? And how many people could we convert? Because when people see a growing movement, they start to pay attention. When they see a bunch of candidates, they pay attention. If we have a clear, unified message that's radical, I mean, it's going to be very uncomfortable to be a candidate. You won't get a lot of applause. You're going to get challenged at, but having people like that across the country is what we really need right now, man. It's like, I've got kids, eventually I'll have grandkids, and this country is broken. It's broken. And the only thing that can mend it, that can keep us all together, is liberty. It's, you know, we can have e pluribus unum. Out of many, we can have one, but only if it's built on a substrate of liberty. We have all these special interest groups and ethnicities and people competing to point the gun at each other. We can never have peace. We can never have unity, and Canada's just going to go to shits. Yeah.
Well, actually, I don't know if you would tend to agree with this, but what I've noticed, especially with libertarians in particular, is it's like you say, and people have used the terminologies like trying to herd cats, but because we all, because of the fact that libertarianism does appeal to us, we're very individualistic, right? And and I would also say, because libertarians tend to gravitate towards capitalism, that we also enjoy some healthy competition, right? Which kind of it does make it more difficult because of that competitive nature that's just kind of baked in the cake for libertarian, and so individualistic. It is very difficult. So that is one area that it's going to be really, no matter how, and I've tried to run this scenario through my head 100 different times. Like, how do you know, how you get people like that? Because that's the kind of people that you're.
That's right. Well, I've had some varying success with that. And, you know, the analogy I like to use is, yes, we're trying to organize cats, very individualistic creatures, right? But the way you don't do that is with a stick, where you're constantly debating and like telling them they go that direction, that's wrong, and I'll explain to you why you're wrong right now. That doesn't work to organize cats. What I always did on the farm to get all the cats in one place and organized was put down a warm saucer of milk, and they would come and they would just follow their self-interest to that milk, and they would be organized, right? And so what my job is as leader is to find out what that warm saucer of milk is, right? And to focus them on a positive message, something that nourishes them, something that is meaningful to them, no matter what type of cat they are, whether they're a calico or a tabby or an AMCAP or a minarchist. I want to find that thing that brings them to that same thing of milk that we can organize around. Well, it has to be a positive message.
I could think what could help in terms of replacing that milk for people that are libertarians would be a $1,000 right? But
well, what? Sorry,
I would say that to replace that bit of milk, well, throw $1,000 bill down there. You'll have all kinds of.
There you go. I thought you were going to say something like hookers and blow. But
that's the thing. You better have some really deep pockets there, Tim. You want to do it that way. But yeah, no,
the Andrew Yang, the Yang Gang thing, right? $1,000 for everyone.
Yeah. No, I get that. Actually, totally makes sense. There has to be something that you can. But I guess that's where the morality aspect of it should be something. It's got to be the economic arguments are pretty straightforward and simple, but because of people's own, like you say, self-interest. But it is kind of pointing out the fact, and that's why I kind of like listening to Ayn Rand too, because the way she puts forth the whole premise of objectivism and the principles is there's actually, because if you heard it out of context, the way she talks in terms of like doing everything selfishly. You know, if you take that out of context, that sounds bad, but not really, because if you think about all human beings, we inherently and instinctively are born, bred, and raised, just by sheer fact we're alive on this planet today, is to take care of ourselves first and foremost.
Right,
I mean,
right.
that's the only way you can thrive and
Yeah,
survive.
and I like it back to, you know, I recently went out and interviewed this farmer who's under the gun for supplying his produce directly to consumers. Government's trying to throw him in jail and shut him down. But he runs a permaculture operation, and he's a big fan of Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris and all these guys. And he was telling me, I don't know if we captured this in the interview, but he says, you know, the philosophy of permaculture is very similar to libertarianism in the sense that what we want to do is what's right, what's best for the individual, but also what's best for the individual at the same time that it's best for the family, that it's best for the community, and is best for the world, right? And so once all those layers are aligned, I mean, that's beautiful, right? And I think that libertarianism, you know, we focus on quite a bit on how it's good, best for the individual, but maybe we need to talk a little bit more about how it's best for the family, and then how it's best for the community, how it's best for the nation and the world. Because I do believe that once enough individuals are lined up with this philosophy, it's best at all layers of society. You know, and a lot of people, you know, I saw a guy, Matt Walsh, I think he writes for Ben Shapiro's thing. He was talking about how libertarian conservatives have allowed this to happen. And he showed this picture of this drag queen doing kind of like a lap dance for this little girl. It was this video making the rounds yesterday. He was blaming, this is why I can never be a libertarian conservative. Well, let's understand that conservatives have long supported public schools. They've long supported big government, and those are the things that demolish the family. Yeah. And so if you want a socially conservative society, if you want one where you have committed relationships and strong families, that is what emerges from a libertarian world. You know, I truly believe that a libertarian society where you're free to do hookers and blow actually turns into more socially conservative, because people naturally want to have, because they're on the hook, then they pay a price for making poor decisions and unhealthy decisions with their own life. They bear the responsibility. It's not socialized across society anymore. So if you start making mistakes and going down dark paths, that your life just isn't going to be very good compared to those people who make better choices. And I think, you know, the older I get and the more, you know, I have kids and responsibilities and stuff, kind of the more socially conservative I get in my own personal life, but I still want to decriminalize drugs, and I still want vice to be legal and all those kinds of things. But I just think that would spread. So I think, you know, conservatives have kind of lost the plot. They've made government in charge of marriage, right? Government in charge of schools, all these kinds of things. And now that's come back to bite them. So I disagree with Matt Walsh. And so I really, truly believe that libertarianism is best for society at all levels. We have a much stable family environment. We have better communities where instead of outsourcing to the state my responsibility or my duty to help my neighbor out, if I see him struggling, I'm going to feel more like, listen, I need to help this guy out. There's no one else. I need to organize something, get something going for him. I feel like that community is far tighter and better, even though they're just a bunch of individuals who are free to do whatever they want and chase their self-interest. They're not being forced to help people through this coercive monopoly called the state or something.
Yes. You know, actually, when you talk about that, and too bad, because it seemed like all the stars could have aligned. Well, not necessarily all, but when Jordan Peterson became popular because of his pushback against Bill C-16 and compelled speech, and the fact that he's a psychologist and he incorporates, you know, the aspects of religion, you know, and Christianity into it. I think, I mean, obviously, well, he identified, I think he said as classical liberal, so pretty much libertarian anyways, I would suggest, but it would have been a great thing for someone like Jordan Peterson, while he had that popularity, to be able to talk about these kind of concepts. He kind of tried to tie psychology. Like I say, it helped a lot of us out in terms of our own internal dialogue and other people that are out there in the thinking sphere, trying to come up with ideas and concepts of what do we do. You know, humans need we need an authority of sorts, right? We need morality. It is a construct, so it's got to be something that is derived based on something somebody conjured up. Now, UPB and objectivism or the NAP, all those things work out great. But like Jordan Peterson admits, once you get down into the nitty gritty of it, you can kind of destroy the concept of God quite easily. But even people like, was it Brett or Eric Weinstein? Weinstein, I should say, sorry. I think it was Brett was talking about, and was it Dawkins? And a couple of them were even trying to talk about coming up, constructing something where there's like something even right in the genome, that the God gene, more or less, right? There is something inherent in us, but it has to be something that has, like, once again, back to a more of that unified message. But I don't know how we're going to do it, because libertarians, like you say, I know some too, and they tend to be, once again, I hate to do the left right thing, but some libertarians as well I've associated with, but probably have separated myself from them quite a bit, is the ones that they just don't like. They like the concept of hedonism, and they think, getting rid of garbage, getting rid of any of these concepts of imposing, morality onto people, but I would suggest that libertarians, actually, that's the thing, is we got to have something to replace the morality, whether you want, like I say, because government, as we know, once you place it in the hands of fallible human beings, then you're messed. Like, it's just going to be open to interpretation, just like judges and the judicial system today. I mean, we all know, you read the Charter of Rights, pretty simple stuff, but if you look, probably a quarter of the laws on the books completely infringe on those rights, but the judges interpret those laws loosely enough that it aligns with using force against people that haven't done anything wrong themselves. But there has to be, to me, like for libertarians, it has to come back to the moral messaging predominantly, because, like you say, it's not about the politics. Politics is the downstream of culture. If you get the morality lined up, which is why I think the founding fathers, I think the reason why that works so well for a little while is, first of all, you had a new land to start with. You had Christianity as the basis. So people already kind of understood that Jesus, like was the individual, free will, and So there was already, and there was morality baked in the cake. You had the Enlightenment era. You had post-Reformation. So you had all these things that come together at the right time, the right era. And like I say, there was an actual place to go, right? So there was a place to go to try to start this kind of or experiment where you could implement all those ideas. But now we're so far away from those couple hundred years now, is what is the basis? What is the foundation other than, I get it, the NAP, self-ownership and property rights, but how we get that dominating in the culture? To me, like movies, music, and art, those things can definitely have positive influence, but we don't even really have much of that happening in Canada, because Canadian culture in terms of that's kind of pretty weak, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. This is definitely one of the weaker parts of libertarianism, right? We're kind of like the new atheists in a lot of ways, where, and the problem is that atheism, okay, you can make good arguments against God, and religion has done a lot of bad things. It's also done a lot of good things. But the problem is, people who get rid of God don't necessarily get rid of religion, right? They just replace that non-corporeal entity with a non-corporeal entity called the state, which is, 1,000 times worse. That religion of state, I call them stateists, right? They're atheists who don't believe in God, except they now worship the state and believe it's all powerful and pray to it and worship it and sing hymns to it and, do all these things. That's a real problem. It does seem like people, and I've included myself here. Look, I needed a positive set of beliefs, just being a libertarian. Like, I went through an atheist phase, and then that brought me to libertarianism. I just realized that all my beliefs, everything I believed about the world had been put there by other people. And that was very disconcerting. So I got rid of all these beliefs, but now I've got a void. Okay, which direction do I go now? Where do I put my next step? Right. And, when it came to parenting, for example, I realized that I shouldn't initiate force against my kids. Spanking or threatening to spank them was a violation of the principles I'm espousing now. And so, okay, I took that off the table, but guess what? The behavior in my kids didn't improve when I took that off the table. So I had to figure out, okay, took me a while to realize I actually had to provide value to these kids, right? Like I had to get down at their level. I had to see the world through their eyes, understand how I was contributing to these behavior problems, understand that I had a positive obligation here to them, that it wasn't enough for me not to just threaten them with punishments all the time. I had to actually do something of value, because I needed these kids, I needed to deliver them to their future selves where they fully self-own themselves and self-actualize and reach their full potential. And that's when all the behavior changes, positive behavior changes started, is when I figured that, like, I had to actually think like an entrepreneur, and like they were my customers, and I had a duty to, you know, because they were involuntary customers at that, right? They didn't choose me as a dad, so I had to even hire, right? So yeah, we need something like that in libertarianism, I think. And you know, I'm not 100% sure what that is, but I do know that more and more I've been talking about taking on responsibilities, because there's two sides to the freedom coin. One is freedom from coercion, violent coercion from others. The other is I can get more freedom in my life by taking on more responsibilities, by having actually more self-discipline, right? By getting up early, working out, automating a lot of the things that make my life better, and just getting them done, grinding them out. I actually have more choices available to me at the end of the day because I do those things. And that's something I can actually affect in my life. Those are positive things I can do that give me more freedom right now. And I'm realizing more and more, well, look, yes, we have this big apparatus. There's nothing I can do about it. I can't control other people. I can't control the state. I can barely influence anybody. But, you know, maybe what I need to do is focus on all the things that have brought incredible flourishing in my life, pursuing meaning, pursuing purpose, and getting rid of all the things that are just kind of laid out for me that culture expects me to follow, and taking charge of my own destiny. You know, and I realize it's more and more with young men, especially, they lack that father figure that can kind of point them in that direction, and they kind of slip off into either this SJW world or this alt-right world, where they're either hate men or they embrace what they think is masculinity, but it's this kind of false machismo that you see in inner city gangs and stuff like that, with the lats flared out, walking around, beating their chest, and you know, acting like a bunch of chimps. You know, that's not masculinity either. And you know, I had the benefit of having some great men as role models in the fire service, who taught me how to be a man by taking on responsibility and providing value to my community and those around me. And so more and more I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe what I need to do is shift gears and start offering to teach young men, mentor them. And I've been doing that a bit more just on the side, kind of privately. There's guys that reach out to me that are struggling. They don't want to get their life together and stuff like that. And, you know, that's been having some positive effects and helping people with workout programs and different things like that. So, you know, I've kind of been shifting gears a little bit towards, okay, what are some positive tools I can give people to actually increase their freedom right here today? And maybe that's more and more what I need to do while I'm spreading the message of liberty.
Well, you know what? That's perfect, because that ties right into, I had a question here I wanted to pose to you, because seeing as how you are from you live out west in Alberta, so you would definitely more so than on the East Coast be surrounded by people that would identify as conservatives. And this would be probably mostly referencing men in particular, although women as well, but mostly I would say men. But as a paramedic and firefighter, have you had the libertarian conversation with anyone in law enforcement? I find they tend to have such reverence for authority, they end up hating libertarians far more than most leftists. Now, where I would go, just to kind of elaborate and expand on that a little bit, is through the PBC, and this is where I noticed this predominantly, was a lot of people that are either military now or former military, or police officers, former or still active duty, did tend to, you know, gravitate towards the PBC and supporters. And, you know, as long as I was talking anti-leftist stuff, that, oh, we're buddy, we're awesome, everyone's patting each other on the back, right? The minute though, you know, I point out the fact that, like, I don't want to use particular examples here, but, you know, the fact that, you know, the people that if you're worried about the size of the state, like, who do you think enforces, whether it's the liberals in charge or the conservatives in charge or the NDP, who do you think it is that follows through the orders and the edicts of the state? no matter, even if the police go and let's say they vote conservative, if Trudeau liberals are in power, and let's say the Trudeau liberals under Blair or whoever, they do come in and start to, let's say, implement some kind of a gun ban, it'll be those very conservative law enforcement officers. I hate the fact that we even use that term anymore. It should, our term nowadays, it should be just police officer, peace officer. But this is what we deal with, and actually, it's more apt to what they actually do is enforce the laws, right? They're not really keeping much peace anymore. But how do you, like, to me, like I say, and because you're a paramedic and a firefighter, you've obviously had to deal with people in the field of law enforcement, obviously, right?
Yeah.
And even in your own personal life, I'm sure you taught them. Do you find, because of that reverence for authority and that seemingly it just comes part and parcel with the package, that if you identify as conservative, you automatically, instinctively got to be all pro, military and pro police, like that's, and to me, as soon as I push back against that, I get more backlash than from a lot of leftists, right?
Yeah, it's definitely tough, right? I would say that I've met a lot of soldiers who say that, yeah, spending some time in the military has turned me into a libertarian. I see the BS of what we're doing. Right. I've seen a little bit of that with police as well. I used to work with a guy who quit the force because he just couldn't stomach enforcing drug laws and enforcing all these things where they make them go and enact violence on people who are peaceful, but just doing something the law deems bad or something. It was eating away at him. And I've had friends go into the force and they go in there to protect and serve and with all these noble things, and even the military. And then they, especially in the police force, they become jaded and develop this kind of us versus them mentality, right? And they kind of have to, for their own psychological self-preservation, because they're going in and they're having to use force on people. They have to turn those people into bad guys for them to justify what they're doing. And they pretty soon start to see everything as a bad guy. And, regularly on the job, like, in fact, a couple tours ago, I went to a house, this lady said that she told her ex-boyfriend that she was going to kill herself or something like that. And then he couldn't get a hold of her. So he called 911. We always go in there with the police whenever someone's involved with self-harm, just for a safety thing. And, I decided, okay, well, it's just a lady. We'll go in there. We'll help. We'll see what's going on, make sure she's alive. And as soon as I opened the door, this pit bull came running up the stairs. So I closed the door and waited for the cops. But of course, as soon as the cops get there, everything escalates, right? They're screaming back and forth. There's threats of being arrested in Form 10, which is like being arrested under the Mental Health Act, right, that's being a danger to yourself or something like that. This, if the dog wasn't in the picture, we would have gone in there. We would have found out that she was just being angry at her boyfriend and wanted to get back at him and said something she regrets or whatever, and confirmed that she didn't actually take anything. And no, she doesn't intend to harm herself. She just made a stupid tweet or whatever. And it would have been done. But now, because the cops are there, they're a hammer and everything is a nail to them. And this happens so often, right? It's just like we're on a call with someone in psychological distress for whatever reason. It's an emergency or they're having a psychotic break or whatever. We get them calmed down. We're at the point where they're starting to cooperate and comply voluntarily. And then the police come in the door and they just escalate things, because they're taught here, especially in Canada, they're not taught de-escalation techniques so much as they're taught force escalation techniques, right? They have this force wheel where they start with minimal force and escalate up to lethal force. And so immediately when they walk in the door, that's in the back of their mind is, okay, what's the appropriate level of force here? They're not thinking about how do I de-escalate things? How do I avoid using force? They're thinking, what force can I justify using here? And so it's a totally different mindset. So it's tough. Like it's hard to break through to these people. I try to be sensitive and sympathetic to some degree to these people. Like, I know some libertarians are like, you're the worst kind of people and blah, blah, blah. I think that's the wrong approach to take. But, the way I look at it, like it kind of bugs me when I hear people praise the military like they fought for our freedoms, when I'm trying to think of a war in recent memory where the war didn't actually infringe on our freedoms in terms of taxation and making us more susceptible to terrorism and all these other things. But I remind myself that, look, these are the noblest and bravest people, young men who stepped up, who are willing to risk their life to protect others. That is what they got into these professions for. That's what I got into firefighting for. I could have just as easily gone into the police force. I'd be a much different person today if I had. Thank God I chose correctly. But that most noble instinct in our young men is being twisted to the purposes of the state, and that I want to be sympathetic to that, and I realize that coming out guns blazing is not the correct approach, and that a lot of these people actually, when you talk to them reasonably and talk to them like humans, they ultimately admit and recognize that, yeah, there's some real problems with the system, and they wish they didn't have to enforce things. And most cops for the last decade haven't really enforced cannabis laws, for example. They might use them as a charge if someone's doing something violent to like get something to stick and get this person off the street. But they're not. They get it that smoking a joint isn't bad in and of itself. So I don't know. I try to keep political conversations to a minimum when I'm at work, because that's probably not the time to convert anyone, right? But
yeah, well, I guess one thing I would just like to add into that is, and you were even basically alluding to the fact that I think one of the gentlemen you were speaking to actually quit the force because of the laws. But see, that's the thing. Like, whether you're talking about teachers or whether you're talking about police, well, like I say, those in law enforcement today, or the politicians, what I notice is, obviously now the culture is the biggest drivers, but as the culture is breaking down and you don't have that unified message in terms of the meta narrative, like Christianity is the overarching force, and the way that was presented predominantly, but each generation, or as time goes forward, right, you're seeing the political class. I mean, maybe 150 years ago might have been a little bit higher standard in terms of who would have been considered part of the political class. Same with educators, right. Same with doctors. I mean, we've heard people talk about the fact that doctors, before there was socialized healthcare, obviously a doctor that went into the field prior to socialized healthcare, they went in with the right intentions, because that was the incentive. The incentive structure was to go in there to help people, because that was the only incentive structure. But once you've turned it socialized and a couple of generations goes by, well, now everything's changing. And I think that's kind of working out with the police too, because, well, when my parents were younger, I remember them saying they were called peace officers. When I was younger, they were police officers. Now that I'm older, it's law enforcement. So the culture in everyone, and that's why you have people, if you're called law enforcement, well, now you're going to have that kind of mentality. That psychology is someone that wants to go into law enforcement. Whereas if it was still, if they were still deemed peace officers, right, it kind of comes with the connotation that you're trying to keep the peace, which would naturally align with de-escalation. But law enforcement, you say it, and same with like the doctors, like, so I don't know how you prevent this kind of degradation, and no matter what these fields go into, but of course it all comes down to, as far as I'm concerned, incentivizing. So to me, incentive is the key driver for no matter what. So what do you think personally, for anyone that's watching this, that's whether they're in the teaching profession, the educators are in the medical field, or police officer, the military, what is something that they can focus on, especially if they're competent in their field and they have influence in others in their field? What could they concentrate themselves on as the key factors to make the culture shift more towards this kind of more peaceful interaction engagement, rather than just using the state as their means to an end?
Yeah, well, I think especially if you're a senior person or someone who has influence or is respect. I mean, you just teach the younger people who are letting the uniform.
Even answer, or is it the fact that you have so many of the bad people at the top of maybe there is no chance of, because maybe you got the wrong people in leadership positions today. That's another option.
Well, I think there's opportunity to advance, even if you're a good person, and I think there's opportunity to influence. I've seen it in my own profession. For example, there's something that happens, right? And this comes back to the Zimbardo experiments, or the Stanford prison experiments, where they split student groups into prisoners and guards. And as soon as they put on the uniform, they became that, right? They became authoritarians. I see this a little bit even with firefighters and paramedics, right? They put on this uniform, they're getting all this esteem from the community, which puts them up on a pedestal, and says you're heroes. And, you know, you go to calls and you expect compliance, right? And, you know, I've seen, especially with difficult clients, right? And you go to the reserve and you have a difficult client who is being just rude and combative, and like, you know, won't give us, like, the impulse is to just say, I'm the authority, I'm the authority here, you will obey me, and we will get, you know, and we'll call the cops if we have to, but I think we can handle you ourselves, kind of thing. Or, you know, they look down on certain clients that are in marginalized groups because, this person again, or like that again. So, you know, I've had some luck talking with people and say, look, our clients don't have a choice over who they get to serve them. They are stuck with us. They're stuck with me and you right now. It's an involuntary relationship. And that gives us a higher duty to be respectful and to de-escalate and do all the things we can to be as treat them as much as customers as we possibly can within the system. And you know, that goes a long ways when they have a senior guy telling them these things, and checking their ego all the time too, right? Like, I remember one time I had some guy complain that the garbage men were making almost as much as we were, and we're goddamn heroes, right? I'm like, kid, are you kidding me? This community will do just fine without us sitting around the fire hall playing foosball and going out and kicking ass every now and then. Like, it would fall apart tomorrow if we didn't have garbage men. Those guys are like risking their lives more than we are, as far as I'm concerned. Like, out on the city streets, exposed in the cold, who knows what, poking through the garbage bags, going out to the dump, these dirty things, and like emptying out, you know, like, our community would literally fall apart without truck drivers, without garbage men. I mean, these are the heroes to me. Like, if I were paying voluntarily for any of these services, the last service I would pay for is the one you and I are providing, of sitting around a fire hall waiting for things to catch fire. Like, that's, you know, it's ridiculous. So I do a lot of work to check egos and to remind people that our customers are forced to have us involuntarily. Like, what if we were competing with the service we provide? How would we show up? It would be a little bit different, right? And I've had some pretty good luck with that, of correcting attitudes. And I think that if you're a cop or military guy, you can do that too. And I think there's a lot of good people in those professions too that are doing that. I've met a few of them who get it, you know. So I think that, look, we're in an imperfect world. Like, the roads aren't private. Like, we're just, you know, even if I were, like, as a firefighter, I don't have the option of starting a competing fire service, selling subscriptions to my service. If I were, you know, you could say, okay, well, maybe I could go work privately out in industry or something like that. But again, the only reason a lot of those industry has fire services because the state either requires it, or, like, everything comes back to, like, everything is corrupted by the state. So we're never going to have that perfect world, right? So we're all operating in an imperfect world, and all we can do is exert our influence positively in that direction. And what doesn't work is, and because I've done this a lot too, believe me, is going on rants and railing and sending out all staff emails explaining why this bullshit government policy is screwing everything up, and this authoritarianism is like bad and that kind of thing. Believe me, I've been down that path. I've taken suspensions. I've been, like, blacklisted and, like, you know, almost fired a few times. And I've got nowhere with it, right? And so I've just come to realize that, look, I need to be friendly. I need to respect that people are stuck in the same position I am. They don't understand my perspective at all. So my job is to help them understand it in whatever way I can. So just, you know, expand your sphere of influence. And you do that by taking on more responsibility, being a positive member of whatever community you're a part of. Do the things that can earn respect and trust and influence, and develop your leadership skills. Those are all positive things you can do, and that will make you far more effective at spreading this message a little bit, even if it's just influencing young guys to treat patients more respectfully than they otherwise would, right?
Excellent. Well, back to, anyways, that's perfect. Thanks, Tim, for doing that. But back to a kind of original the point of this video, which was referencing your video with David, talking about the actually, I kind of, when I watched it, actually I watched it again this morning, 3/4 of it anyways. to kind of get caught back up. And I heard more of the pro for, but it was kind of the way you the set it up was for and against, more or less, like radicalism. But what would you say? Would you suggest that given the more of the radical message, although what I even kind of reference it, I get why you do it, because yes, in a status environment, it is radical to talk about freedom. That's the insane part, right? That's the Orwellian world we live in, that people like Tim and I have to be considered radicals in any way. Like,
right.
I want to take over.
I should define radicalism here. It's not, I don't, when I say radical.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, just for your audience, I don't mean that we need to be like these memes we see of the left being radical, of screaming and jumping up and down and throwing tantrums and that kind of thing. That isn't, to me, isn't what I mean by radicalism. I mean by being unapologetically principled, of always coming back to the principle and not going off it. And where this kind of comes from is there's a great essay, and I encourage you all to read it. It's called "Do You Hate the State?" by Murray Rothbard. And in this essay, Murray's saying that everything has to be motivated by this principle of hate for the state, essentially, is like he puts it. And he criticizes David Friedman. Now, David Friedman is Milton Friedman's son, and David Friedman is actually an anarcho-capitalist, the same as Murray Rothbard. But Murray had some harsh words for David Friedman, because David Friedman was talking about he's an anarcho-capitalist because he just thinks it works better, right? And so this would kind of be like an abolitionist saying, well, we ought to end slavery because markets are going to work better, and we're going to improve GDP, and we're going to have more economic efficiency or something like that by getting rid of slavery, right? And Murray Rothbard says, no, we don't put out that message. That is not the message. The message is slavery is bad because we don't own other people. That's the principle. That's the radical message. And so he was criticizing David Friedman for his utilitarian strategy or approach to thinking and to communicating. And what Friedman says, or what Rothbard says, is give me a radical minarchist over a utilitarian anarcho-capitalist any day. Yes, we have different conclusions, but we are coming from the same principle, and we're not doing it for utilitarian reasons, for pragmatic reasons. We're doing it for principled reasons. And oh, by the way, things will get better also because, as Ayn Rand said, what's principled is also practical, right? Principles are practical, and so that's why we need principles, because they work, right? But and the other thing I'll say about this is, at the end of the day, these people that say, well, I'm just about weighing the policies, and like, I'm an independent thinker here, whatever works best. Let's look at the evidence and the data and then figure out what works best. And these people claim not to be ideological or principled. And I would say that's poppycock. They probably have some unconscious principles, but ultimately I'm for liberty and whatever works for liberty. Okay. So I don't care about GDP. I don't care about, this metric or that metric, or whether this type of school system is getting better grades than that school system. I care about liberty. That's it. So that's the metric I'm looking at. And these people are using some other metric that, to me, is lower down on the values matrix than liberty, which is right at the top. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, listen, Tim, you've been answering the questions beautifully, and I really appreciate that. So what I'm going to do is, if you don't mind anyways, I'm going to ask you one last question, and then if you want, because there's quite a few people that have been, I think, in the chat here, so probably should maybe scroll through them and answer questions.
Sure.
But the only last question I really had for you was predominantly about the plan, I guess, so like I say, I tried dipping my toes in the water with the PBC, nothing against them per se, but yeah, if I'm gonna what I've come to realize, if you're gonna dip your toes in the political waters, you might as well, even then, like, why go half-assed? Might as well, right? So I'm definitely between now and then, however this plays out, and whatever your plan of attack is, which is what my question is, how you want to go, is you can count on me to do whatever I can to help try to get the Libertarian Party of Canada on the map some way, and promote, and just get this message out there to people, so that we don't have to water it down quite so much, so that we can be more clear and concise, and people really know what we stand for. So like I said, what is your plan going forward for the Libertarian Party of Canada?
Yeah, well, we have a convention in Edmonton in May, and you know, we're gonna kind of regroup there and put our brains together and figure out you know, how to focus on. You know, my leadership will probably be up for, I'll be up for re-election, or maybe someone will come out and challenge me. So, you know, I'm looking forward to that convention and some of the ideas. You know, ultimately, what I want is a large group of libertarians who understand that the way we get a smaller government is by making more libertarians, not chasing votes, all working together across this country. And, you know, if we can get libertarians organizing, maybe forming electoral district associations, running as candidates, and getting this message out there, that's how we do it. We have to get the message out there. We have to be loud and proud, and make a lot of noise. And you know, it's not an easy task, you know, because we're competing with this idea that what we need is pragmatism. We're competing with with parties that make some libertarian sort of noises, like the PPC. And you know, it's always a challenge. So you know, I really have a lot of work to do to convince people that, look, the metric of success here is, are you creating more libertarians, not how many votes you're getting. And you know, so we might not be for people who want to who think chasing votes is the way to go. And you know, if you're one of those people, then I would recommend joining like the Conservative Party or the Liberal Party, because those are the parties that are most likely to get votes, and maybe you can make some change from within. And I'm not, well, you know, I won't discount that. I think there are some libertarians in the Conservative Party. I know that, and I'm glad they're there, and I'm glad they're doing whatever they can. I never hear from them. They're not, you know, cultural leviathans like Ron Paul was. They're silently voting establishment and maybe having some influential conversations behind closed doors and in caucus or whatever. That's great. That's not how I'm wired. That's not how you're wired. And that's not how people that libertarians that join the PPC or the Libertarian Party are wired. So if you just can't get on board with these establishment parties, well, then I would argue what you're trying to do is the same as what Bennett and I are trying to do, which is promote principle and change culture, and hoping that that has a long-term effect of changing government, because that's the only thing I think that can. The state influences culture too, but it influences it in a bad way, right? It has a dysgenic effect on people, a dysgenic effect on culture. And you know, from an individual level, if we're all out there pounding the pavement and having conversations, impactful conversations with people, that is what's going to change it. And we have to learn to do it in a way that's effective and impactful. And that's kind of what I'm going to be focused on is, okay, I need my candidates to have all the resources at their disposal and the best chance of success at winning hearts and minds. They can't just go out there and argue and tell people they're stupid and say this idea is dumb, or like debating is not nearly enough. What you have to do is persuade. You have to attract. You have to make your message palatable and attractive. And that is kind of where I'm hoping to provide that warm saucer of milk to people who are really interested in spreading the ideas of liberty. I've had a lot of experience learning what to do, what not to do. And so the value you get from joining the party, running as a candidate, is hopefully we can workshop some of these ideas, become better, more effective communicators of liberty, and that I hope will have an impact.
Yeah, well, that to me, that's perfect answer, because that's what I was just kind of going to allude to myself before I go into the start checking in the questions here is and to me, it's not the checking of the box like you were saying. That's not what I'm predominantly concerned about. But at the very least, and this is something you and David kind of mentioned too, and it's like, yeah, he's absolutely right about this. The beautiful thing about having the Libertarian Party of Canada, and once again, Tim, I really apologize. I should have done this rather than support the PBC. I feel bad for, like, well, I never abandoned you or
no. You know what? Listen, I'll say this: my hurt feelings were my own, a product of my own story in my head. Right? It was, you know, I know that most PPC people and like people that were libertarians that joined the PPC, that it wasn't that they were against me. It was that they were trying something else. And look, I can't even fault them. There's part of me that was tempted to jump ship and join the PPC. There's part of me, I was even thinking about running in the Conservative Party leadership race. And I think there's some merit in that. Like I wanted Canada to have a Ron Paul moment. I wanted to get up on that stage in front of the nation and say taxation is theft and deliver the Ron Paul message. I think that would be valuable. So I don't blame anyone for trying to go down that pragmatic route. Those are my own issues to deal with. But I do appreciate that you are that you're saying that, and makes me feel better. If that's worth anything.
And I genuinely mean it. But what I was trying to get to here is it is very important. This is the thing, and a lot of us libertarians, we kind of do overlook. I'll even admit myself, the Libertarian Party of Canada as the important. So that's the thing. Without it, it's not that I believe that politics is the leading edge of what we need to do. No, but it is. Like by having the Libertarian Party of Canada in this country, at least, which is why I'm very grateful that you are. And I don't know. I know a lot of Canadians that are libertarians, but to me, you are the best leader for the party as far as I'm concerned. But as far as having the party, like you say, if we can affect the culture, having that, it's an invaluable means that we have at our disposal by having an actual political party that you can take ideas to and to try to shift it in the political realm. So that to me is very, very important. So whatever anyone out there, and I'm even going to take my own advice, do what you can to help support the party. But the most important thing, like what Tim was alluding to, is we got to get the ideas out there, but definitely whatever you can, because without the party, you're not going to have any political success at all without having the party do so. And at least with the Libertarian Party, unlike the PPC, I don't have to water down my message. Everything about the Libertarian Party, like it's perfect. It aligns. I don't have to feel like I'm soiling not soiling, but I don't have to feel like I'm deceiving myself some ways by trying to water down the message. Because I am the kind of person just like you. I love what it is I just like to be honest. And if I feel like I got to be deceptive in any way, it just makes me feel
and listen, I was that way too, even with the party. I mean, in the first election I ran, we did a 15% flat tax. We tried to take the softer approach and thought, okay, we'll hook them in with the soft message and then we'll connect them with the principles once they're in the door. You just start playing all these games with like in your own mind. Like when you're in front of an audience, you withhold some things, you water the message down a little bit, you try to tailor it, you start to feel a little dirty, and then I wear this ring of power on my finger to remind myself that I have an involuntary relationship with my kids. That gives me power. That power can corrupt, and I need to remind myself that. And this ring started getting heavy at times when I was on that campaign trail. And so I've just kind of doubled down and just committed. I realize now, and I was interested to watch the Libertarian Party in the US. I was kind of rooting for Johnson and Weld because I wanted to see how those pragmatists would do and whether that was maybe the right way to go. Because if that was the way to go, then maybe that's what I should adopt is water down the message, be more like them and more like the PPC or something. And no, that wasn't the message I got at all. And now what we're seeing in the US Libertarian, I'm seeing some positive things like Tom Woods, Dave Smith. They bought memberships. These are radical anarchists that say, listen, the Libertarian Party carries our most prized label with them, right? They are the standard bearers, whether we like it or not. They're on that political stage, in the political spotlight during election times. And so we better get involved and make sure that they're putting out a principled message if that's what we care about. And that's the kind of attitude I like to see, people being part of the solution. And I would encourage, whether you're radical or pragmatist, the most practical thing we can do is be radical. But I get it from both ends. The radicals say, well, I don't want to give any credibility to the political system. And I'm right there with you, brothers. I don't either. But there is a stage, there is a spotlight, and there's an opportunity to connect with statists. And we'd be foolish to not stand on that stage and connect with them and try to get the message out. So I appreciate your compliments and your support, Bennett, and I look forward to it. But should we get into some of these? There's a bunch of comments here.
Yeah, go for it. I just want to mention real quick though that Good Times donated $5. Thanks for the good.
Good Times. Thanks, Good Times.
Really appreciate that. So yeah, if you want, Tim, like I say, I'll kind of look through and scroll myself, but you go right ahead, buddy. Like I say, because I'm sure there are lots.
Okay, I'll just scroll through here and see some of them. Statum is a crime. Yep. Yes, you're correct. I think that's right. The welfare state is immoral. Definitely, all Muslims are leaving their nations to invade non-Muslim nations. It's called Hiraj, Islamic migration and on. Yeah, that could be definitely true. And this is why we want a government that is restrained, right? So that no one, whether it's a socialist or a radical jihadist, can take it over and bend it to their will. I don't know. Part of me is thinks too that that there are a lot more liberal Muslims now because they migrated to the West. If that makes any sense. Like, I think Muslims that come to Canada, maybe they become more liberal over time. I see on shows, like there's a show called Lone Star 911 where there's this like Muslim hijab wearing Muslim woman who's a firefighter working alongside males doing all these things. Like, I have to imagine that corrupts the radical Islamic idea a little bit, right? As much as you and I would look at that and say, okay, they're trying to be super woke and politically correct. At the same time, if you're a young Muslim woman watching that and saying, hey, why can't I be a firefighter? Why can't I do these kinds of things? That has to have kind of a corrupting influence on jihadist and fundamentalist Islam, just like it kind of has done with Christianity. So who knows? I don't know what the right answer to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to read this comment from Keep It Real. Anybody in the Canadian military fighting overseas is not fighting for Canada. These two people talking on YouTube right now are fighters for Canada. And thank you for saying that. Keep It Real.
Thanks, Keep It Real.
Yes, I actually agree with that sentiment, not to demean the men and women in the military. That's not my purpose in suggesting. I'm sure that's not the purpose of Keep It Real saying that. But yeah, I do every day. I fight for, and it's not necessarily for Canada. I mean, this is the country I live in, but I fight for freedom and I fight for liberty, and I care about those things. And why? Because that's, for me to be free, I recognize I need a lot of people around me to be free. And I need them to have the same ideas and concepts, because that's the only way I get my selfish freedom requires that I make sure everyone else around me has the exact same freedoms. And that's what we're doing. And these kind of conversations that we're having, going to a foreign country and just killing people that you've never met in your life because some politician or your sergeant or your commander told you to. I mean, in certain cases that, you can make a case for that dependent on the situation, the scenario. The world wars, you might be able to say it might have been worthwhile to keep it off of the North American shores. I've heard the arguments pro or for and against that. But yes, it's those of us that are talking about the ideas, because it's the ideas, it's the culture. And what we're doing is, yes, we're not picking up a gun. We're using nothing more than our minds and the language to help create as much freedom as humanly possible. And to me, that does go a long way. And that's why I feel very proud to do these kinds of things. It's it'd be easy, I guess, to.
Thank you for your service, Bennett.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. No, but I really do appreciate that. Keep it real, because that is something that people like us that do. We don't get much accolades from too many people. So when you get it, it's nice to get a.
You bask in it. You bask in it.
Right.
Blue Apple subbed to your channel, Tim. Thank you, Blue Apple. Appreciate the support, man.
Yeah, please, anyone out there that's actually watching this there, go on over. Like I say, it's scrolling across the bottom there. It's called Tim Moen Liberty Journey. And go subscribe to his channel, because he does a regular podcast. How often do you do it with David?
We put out 2 episodes a week. It's Liberty Experts podcast. You can go to iTunes, and we also put them up on YouTube. So.
Right. Okay. So I didn't know about the Liberty Expert. I still watch most stuff on YouTube. I don't do much in terms of podcasting much. Tom Woods and stuff on the Tom Woods show, like a lot, just go straight to his page. I'll do that. But definitely check out Tim's YouTube channel, because like I say, they cover all the most important topics, and he's got David there with him that kind of helps play devil's advocate, that's what I like to see too, that even though both of you would obviously identify as libertarian and agree on a lot, it's nice to see you two back and forth, kind of pushing back against your own premises even from time to time, because really, like I said, like I always said so many times, that's the only thing that's ever broken me out of any preconceived notion, is someone challenging it and doing a really good job of it, right? And David seems to do a pretty good job of that. So it's a great podcast that you guys are doing. I appreciate that you guys are.
Douglas Jack says family is of God. If you hate God, you'll hate family too. Yeah, maybe. I think there's something to that for sure. You can't argue that Christian families seem to be the tightest knit families in a lot of ways. What about Alberta's debt? Lightning Rod says. And yeah, that's a great question. I mean, our government, Kenny, is running up the debt right now. You know, the tax revenues from the oil industry are down. I suspect that's probably why. But he also hasn't really cut anything substantial out of the budget. I mean, the budget is as big or bigger than it's ever been. So, you know, despite all these public unions talking about layoffs and everything else, and Kenny attacking them, you know, I just don't see the you know, fiscal conservatism, I guess, is always like just kind of keeping things status quo or a little bit more. So we're seeing that in Alberta right now. I say Wexit, says Icy Frost. Yeah, Wexit it's a great idea. I would love to see more decentralized, like see nation state split and get smaller, because I think, you know, maybe Canada is way too big to have unity. It's a tough road, right? You can secede under the Clarity Act in Canada, but you have to meet a pretty high bar. First of all, it has to be done as a province. So Alberta would have to say, have a provincial government elected that wants to separate, which we don't have right now. So that's the first hurdle. Then once you have that, they would put out a clear referendum, and 51% of the people, a clear majority, would have to support it. And I think it's not just a clear majority of the voters, those that vote, but a clear majority of the actual population. So if you think only half the people vote or something like that, well, you're going to need 100% of those people, I think, to vote in favor of separating to get it. I'm not 100% sure on that. But then the next obstacle you have to clear is there has to be like meaningful engagement with people that have a claim against separating. And so that might be First Nations groups, that might be other provinces that have something to say. So there's all sorts of ways that the federal government can derail secession. So, you know, that's a tough one. Lightning Rod says Wexit is for fools. You know, I don't know. I understand the sentiment, but I do think a lot of the Wexit people are very similar to other populists and like the Yellow Vest people. Like I have a hard time jumping on board with Wexit because of the people involved in the movement. They're giant statists, most of them, who, you know, just want their own version of the state.
Right. I just wanted to mention there, Tim, can you see the question I have on the screen there on your end from Victor?
Given every said, what is about the borders?
So yeah, I think you might have missed a word. And then the next question he had was, what is yeah. So me and Victor have had this conversation a couple times. We've done our own streams together, and it is something he likes to talk about quite a bit, is the open versus closed border debate. So
right.
if you wanted to,
sure, I can take that. I think I've talked to Victor about this. You know, I've spoken at his events. Sons of Anarchy, he puts on a great event there in Vancouver. So he does a lot of great work. Victor Pross, guys, check out. He's an anarchist artist, and I think Victor is been fairly opposed to open borders things, right? And I think he would be the first to say that he's not closed borders per se either. But I think the principle here when it comes to national borders is, how do we get the government out of immigration? Because whatever the government is involved in, whatever the state is involved in, it's going to enact policies that grow the state. That's its job, right? And so if it's involved in public schools, for example, it's going to send out a curriculum that worships the state, that breaks apart families, that does all these things. If it's in charge of borders, okay, this year, if Maxime Bernier is the prime minister, maybe we have controlled immigration, but you've just given them a values test and given them all these other powers now to control the borders. And what do you think the Liberals are going to do, or people that want to grow the government? They're just going to use those policies to flood the country or do whatever. So you know, my approach was, again, coming back to liberty, how do we get government out of it? And I say, okay, what we do is, for the time being, while we have this welfare state and everything, we go with a sponsorship program where any Canadian can sponsor an immigrant, provided they're willing to take on the financial responsibility, provided that Canadian citizen is also willing to take on the legal responsibility. In other words, you go off the rails, your sponsored immigrant goes off the rails and starts committing crimes, you are on the hook for the legal costs. So to me, that's a good market approach, because I didn't like the whole arbitrary quotas and everything. I thought it should be more up to however much responsibility Canadians are willing to take on. So to me, and that's kind of Hans Hermann Hoppe's approach as well to immigration, is sponsorship, right? And that's kind of what we would have in a private society where everything is kind of privatized. Because yeah, I mean, when you live in a community, there are reciprocal obligations you have to have. Someone has to pay for the road, someone has to pay for the infrastructure, and the people living there need to pay for it. Right now, that's done through taxation, through theft, but it would be done through contract and through voluntary obligations that you take on by living in that community. So I don't know if that answers Victor's question, but again, I will go back, Victor, to what we said earlier, in that closed border libertarians and open border libertarians are on the same side. Yeah. I'm calling for unity here. Like, yeah. Don't throw in with closed border conservatives. Their goal isn't more freedom. It's to limit. It's to have government in charge of culture and in imposing the kind of culture they want. That's why they don't want illiberal people coming, because they want a more liberal culture or more free market culture, maybe. But we don't want the government in charge of culture, because we think that's going to have a bad effect on culture, and it has. We've seen that. Government's been in charge of marriage, been in charge of schools, been in charge of all these things that conservatives have supported, and things are bad because of it. So Stevie asks, what is the current libertarian tax policy?
Yeah.
If you go to our website, libertarian.ca, and look at our platform, I think we have a pretty good policy there. And what we've said is we want to abolish the income tax. And we, for the time being, like, we can whittle government, if we whittle down government to a minarchist state, police, military, courts, the GST will currently fund that state. We can fund it at the current spending levels at that state. So that is what we're saying right now. We can abolish the income tax, and then for the transition period, we go to a GST. We just keep the GST, and that's it's quasi-voluntary in that you don't have to buy things, you don't have to buy new things. There's ways of avoiding the GST and that sort of thing, right? So, but we can fund it that way. So, and then eventually, what I would prefer to see is we move to some sort of voluntary funding system for the state. There are probably ways that the state can fund itself voluntarily, right? Like, it can get in the business of whatever. It can go into business selling people things voluntarily. It can sell its services voluntarily. We could do something like have a head tax, to something I think I saw on Lou Rockwell once, where let's say voting is not a right but a privilege that you earn. You have to have some skin in the game to vote. So you can voluntarily pay the head tax. Maybe it's $5,000 a year. You're contributing to society in some way. You get to vote in the election. Or, if you don't have the money, maybe you could do some kind of community service or public service, serve in the military, doing something else. If you're disabled, there would be ways of taxing. So there are voluntary ways of setting things up. There's all sorts of different solutions, but while we're figuring that out, we can just whittle things down, get rid of the income tax.
Actually, Tim, before you move on to that next one, actually, I've always thought this, and I'm not really one of those wonks as far as digging into the number. That person really should, though, because it'd probably be quite enlightening to us all to figure out, because Canadians, I think the biggest overarching premise why Canadians are accepting of taxation, predominantly, most of them anyways, would be under the guise of healthcare and education, right?
Sure.
And to me, it would be excellent to know if you could dig down into the numbers, which, like I say, it'd be a lot of couple late nights, I would imagine, with a few cups of coffee trying to break all this stuff down.
Yeah, they keep it kind of hidden purposely. Sorry, yeah. What was that?
That's because to me I'm kind of the mentality, and with the GST, that's a good option as well. But I'm of the mentality of just a flat 10% tax, like a 10% tithing, more or less, because I think most people would be conducive with that 10% level. It's quite minor, and it would, at least, like I say, be something to bridge us to the point where we're heading towards where there is no taxation. But I wonder if, like, 10%, I would suggest, especially the beautiful thing now in terms of, because really healthcare is the only thing left where you could say there is exponential costs, whereas that it's going to be hard to unwind. But the education system, this is the part where, if we only knew how much the education system was truly costing, and acknowledge the fact that we live in the age of information where you could have an education today I mean, everything that we're doing right now, I mean, it's more along a philosophy, right? But
Right.
you can get a philosophical, an economic, a social, you can get all kinds of education today on the internet for basically pennies on the dollars, because of the fact that in the digital sphere, everything is replicable and duplicable. And you could have, instead of 30 students sitting in one classroom, you could have 3 million of them watching the same, instead of, 1,000 teachers, and maybe the Pareto, maybe out of that 1,000, maybe the 100 of them is the best, but out of that 100, there's only 2 that are the extreme best. When you could have the number one best teacher teaching all 3 million people, rather than relying on competencies. So that area, but anyways, go ahead. That's kind of
No, that's all great. Yeah, I'll talk about healthcare, then I'll talk about education. So healthcare, we figured out in Fort McMurray, when I ran in my first election up there, that a typical household in Fort McMurray was paying about $37,000 a year into the healthcare system through their income tax. So about half of government expenditures is in healthcare. So about half your tax bill, I think, roughly goes to taxes. So look at your tax bill, and about half of that is going to healthcare. Now, part of the problem is, so if we were to get rid of the income tax, that would be less government that the federal, less revenue that the federal government has to hold the provinces hostage. Right now, with the Canada Health Act, what happens is that we Albertans, for example, will pay a bunch of income tax to the federal government, and then the federal government will send the province some of that money back, maybe like a few $1 billion to cover healthcare expenses. But it comes with caveats. It says, basically, you have to follow the Canada Health Act, and if you have a bunch of private options out there, well, you're not compliant and you're not going to get the money. So in order for the province to get the money, it then has to abolish private healthcare. And so that's why we have, my first approach would be get rid of income tax. The next approach would be, ideally, we want to get rid of the Canada Health Act, but by eliminating income tax, you basically somewhat rendered the Canada Health Act like you can't really enforce it at that point. Then the provinces could run their own healthcare systems the way they want. And I would obviously want a province that, a nice interim step would just be to legalize healthcare, right? As a paramedic, I can't work for anyone other than the government. I can't work directly for patients. I tried to start just locally in our community, a community paramedic program with our fire department, where we're seeing all these patients that are urgent care patients, that are like elderly people. They're maybe palliative care. They've come home to die. They want to die at home peacefully, but something happens where they have an urgent care thing. It's not emergency, like they don't need to go to emerge, but they do have a genuine health issue that needs to be addressed. Maybe someone who has a underlying respiratory illness, like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, develops a cough. Okay, for you and I, it would be no big deal, but for these people, in a week, we can pretty much guarantee it will turn into pneumonia, where they'll have to be hospitalized. So what a community paramedic does is they goes to this patient who doesn't have mobility. They can't get to their family doctor. They just aren't able to get up and around. You go to the person, you do a full assessment, talk with their family physician, get a prescription for antibiotics, and you deal with that right then and there to prevent the emergency from ever happening. And you could go, like, as a paramedic, I could start a business tomorrow doing this, and there would be thousands of paying customers that would value this. Right now, all we have is a system that says, well, you don't have any options but to call 911. And as a paramedic, I don't have any options but to take you to Emerge, which is the last place you really want to go. It doesn't benefit Emerge. It doesn't benefit all the other people in Emerge. It doesn't benefit the patient. It doesn't benefit the ambulance to be stuck in Emerge, waiting in the hallway for 6 hours, unable to respond to emergencies. It's just a totally broken system. So the first thing would be legalize healthcare. We don't need to carte blanche get rid of the public system right now. We can keep that government-run system, but we can just say, look, if you're a paramedic, a doctor, or whatever, you can do your own business, helping out people. And pretty soon, people become less dependent on that public system, and eventually we could probably abolish it.
Yes.
So, and then the other thing was education. And yeah, you're right. I think actually education is one of those areas where parents can take personal responsibility right now, and it dramatically improve their freedom, their kids' freedom, by taking them out of public school. I've told my kids this as soon as they have kids, and I'm a granddad. grandpa's homeschool is open for business. I don't want my grandkids ever setting foot in public school. You know, we will help them. There's all sorts of resources out there. I like unschooling, which is like, let's help the kid figure out what path his education is going to take. Where is his natural curiosity? How do I keep fueling that? How do I keep bringing those resources to him and keep him chasing his dream of whatever he wants to learn, whatever career he wants to chase? I'm going to get that done, and I'm going to get it done a lot sooner than 12 years. I'll tell you that. I mean, they had court astronomers that were 12 and 13 in Greece. I don't see why kids can't be, you know, chasing their dreams a lot earlier. You know, and that might be online videos, that might be doing an internship. You know, my daughter wanted to be a vet at one point. I was going to take her to the local vet clinic and have her volunteer there for several mornings a week. She could have learned all about veterinary medicine while she was learning other things. You know, there's just all sorts of direct ways you can go when you pull the state out of it and give your kids a proper education. Because you look at kids and you know, they're just curiosity. They're just passionate about learning until they get into school, and then they come home and they're zombies afterwards, and school makes learning drudgery. It doesn't have to be like that, but anyway.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing I'll just add into that too, Tim, is it can be so personalized and so individualized if you take advantage of online you know, education, because once again, you rather than 30 students sitting in one classroom and the teacher has a particular time frame allotted to them, right? And you know, everyone's going to pick up on the messaging in that particular curriculum at the exact same time. Not everyone's as competent, not everyone's as intelligent. So yeah, this way you could be more individualized, and the people that need a little extra help could get it. The people that are more advanced, you know, could fast track through their education. Like you say, some students, you know, maybe 3 or 4 years, right? And they're good to go. They're good to go off into the world and do whatever they want as you know, a young adult. Whereas they might need, you know, a little bit more years. But that's the beautiful thing about an online education, is it can be perfectly suited and tailored to the individual. The only other requirements, of course, would be there got to be testing in terms of competent levels, but that's rather than government accreditation. You know, accreditation, like, well, you know, a lot of when we were younger, it would have just been what the skills that you developed and can you put them into practice, right? Rather than getting a government paper. Yeah. A lot of people.
Well, and it just needs to be like, to me, it should be like education should be kind of like grad school. Like when I went to grad school, it wasn't like you're taking tests and you're like memorizing facts and regurgitating them for a test. It's like, what do you know and how do you know it? And can you prove it to me? Right. And yeah, so a thesis is all about, okay, here's what I know. Here's all the literature that supports it. Here's what my own research has shown in my experiments. And it's all, and that's how you do it. And more, you know, we're seeing kids come out of the unschooling environment or Sudbury Valley schools where they have zero curriculum. That what they're doing is building up educational portfolios that show evidence of their learning. Here's where I did this project. This is how I learned chemical biology or whatever. And this is, you know, and then they're presenting it to institutions like Harvard or different other universities. And they're saying, look, I didn't just meet a standard of regurgitating facts. I actually went out there. I did all these projects. Here's a big portfolio that evidences what I know and how I know it. And, you know, I think that's how education ought to be. It's like, you know, right from a young age, I should be asking my kids, well, how do you know that? How would you prove that? How could you prove that to me? How could we figure this out? What could we learn about this? Right. And that's great. You know, great thing. So I want to get to Stevie's question here. I'm curious to know what the Libertarian Party's current policy on immigration is. Again, I think I answered this, but you can go to libertarian.ca/platform and find our platform there. And it basically is this sponsorship only immigration, where any Canadian citizen, as long as they're willing to take responsibility for that immigrant in terms of finances, in terms of legal responsibility, where if they go off the rails, they're on the hook for the legal costs. You can invite someone over, and we create a path to citizenship and that sort of thing. And then, you know, I think that once you get rid of the welfare state and get rid of all this forced integration, then you can have relatively open borders where people can come over and, you know, buy property off people. I mean, the only way they're going to be able to stay here is if they find someone to rent from, or this or that, or where they're economically productive, right? And this is like, my great grandparents were refugees. They fled Stalin in Soviet Russia. They didn't come here for the welfare state. They came here because there was opportunity for them if they worked hard and contributed to the country to flourish. And they lived in a grain bin for the first year with their 6 kids, and they planted a crop in the ditch because they couldn't afford any land, and they just worked hard, and they eventually created all this wealth and flourishing for themselves. And that's the kind of immigrant we want. People that are willing to do that, to contribute to society, to integrate into our culture. I mean, in a free market, when you don't have all these welfare programs and state interventions, you have to contribute to the culture. And the way you do that is you learn the language, and you provide value to people. And that requires integrating. If you don't integrate, you do what most people did back when my great grandfather came over. And I think like 30% of people just went back to their home countries because they couldn't hack it. They couldn't integrate. So it's kind of, the market is a self-correcting message, self-correcting mechanism that people self-deport and don't come here. It's like you might as well have a giant wall up for someone who wants welfare. They're just not going to come here. I mean, it's a lot cheaper to just get rid of welfare than it is to build a dome over Canada that is impermeable or something, right? It works just as well, and it's way cheaper. Okay, Rage in the Cage says, Canadian Libertarian, hello, I'm here late. Radicalism comes in many forms. Is it time the silent majority takes a few hints? Tim Moen may have opinion, so I'll let you answer that. It's directed to you.
No, I brought that up for you, actually, if you
Oh, you did? Okay.
Answer there.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. So Rage in the Cage, we talked a little bit about this earlier. Radicalism, you could think of these radical leftists, right, who are having tantrums in the street and having, emotional meltdowns and hitting people with bike locks. That's not the kind of radicalism we're talking about here that I advocate for. I advocate for unapologetically being principled, being not afraid to stand on a political stage and say that taxation is theft and it is immoral. That's radical in the sense that it flies against the status quo, and it's very principled. So I say we need to challenge the status quo, and that is being radical. By playing it safe and trying to get votes, you stay within the status quo. You have to operate within the status quo. We need to change it. We need to challenge it. And that can only come from radicalism. It can't come from playing it safe. Is it time the silent majority takes a few hints? Yeah, I think it's time for people to speak up, for sure. I want silent libertarians to speak up. I want, there are radicals out there that just, they would rather take pot shots at people doing things like me on Twitter or on social media than I just don't get the sense that they take their own principles very seriously. Like if they took them seriously, they would try to connect more people with the message, and they might do something like stand on the political stage with me and try to connect people, have difficult conversations with people, shake hands with people, and say, like, why do you want to take my healthcare away? And have to confront that and try to explain in a positive way that, listen, I'm not trying to take healthcare away from you. I'm a paramedic. I give healthcare. I don't take it away. But we can't force people into this system. We can't force people to fund your healthcare. I can't steal money to pay for your healthcare, and you would agree with that. And then just helping people through these steps. So hope that answers your question. Rage.
Not sure if you why not? I guess might as well I don't know if I even want to bother, to be honest. There's a couple questions. Well, not so much questions, so maybe I'll just actually hold off in case there's a question. Well,
put it up. We can talk. If you have any questions, put them up there.
Well, I'm just curious, Tim, have you heard of the Plaid Army?
The Plaid Army? What is that? Some like Scottish tartan thing, or some men in kilts running around?
No, see that's the thing with very fortunate for you, I guess, because you kind of stuck right with the Libertarian. You didn't get caught up in the a lot of us that are supporters of PBC, like I say, I got to know a lot of Canadians from every part of this country, under the PBC. Most of, like I say, I'd say the overarching thing that everyone shared in common was disenfranchised with the Liberal government and wanted to get rid of the Liberal government, which, of course, we were all in agreement. But no, the Plaid Army is a couple, well, not just a couple, it's quite a few of them now, of a lot of the people that I met that were supporters, candidates, guys that, helped support the PBC. They've got their own YouTube channels, and they've called themselves, basically, I've kind of had a bit of a falling out with them because
why do they call themselves the Plaid Army?
Well, it's like I say, these are those guys that, like I say, kind of have that reverence for authority, like, and more about, promoting the police, the military. Actually, one of them in particular, for sure. Well, there's a few of them, but one in particular, is a military guy, and he gets lots of attention there recently because of the whole Omar Khadr thing, right? And I mean, even with that, even that, when you wade into that one, I usually try to avoid the whole Omar Khadr thing, because someone even mentioned about it, and I said, sorry, I just don't agree with it. Like, I don't know. I don't have this hate on for the guy. Now, should the Liberals have given him $10.5 million? No. Do I think the guy's a great guy? But there's so much nuance to that whole Omar Khadr thing. And I'm sorry, I'm just not going to. I mean, I know, he killed American soldier, but he was in Afghanistan. He wasn't in the U.S. He wasn't in Canada. But anyways, without even getting into that, but the Plaid Army. So these are the guys that after the election, because there's no more political collective to gather around, right? The gang kind of separated after the politics, and now they've created their own, which is it's called the Plaid Army, and because they're Canadian, right? Canadian, and mostly like guys that would claim like from the working class type, so the plaid, right?
Ah, gotcha. Okay.
So that's what it is. And like I say, some of them are, I would say, probably fairly decent, but I would say, once again, most of them would identify as probably very proud of their heritage, very nationalist, right? So
sure,
more to me about the gang, the collective, us versus them. So, but like I said, if you have no thoughts on it because you don't know of who they are, then don't even worry about it. But it is something that I know that these guys are like disenfranchised. They're sick of the system. Sure. But at the same time, my issue with them is that they also kind of promote the system, just their kind of system, right?
Well, I mean, a lot of these things are driven emotionally, right? And I can understand where that emotion's coming from. I can sympathize with it to some degree. However, anytime I've acted from a place of anger, frustration, it hasn't ended well. And so what we have to do is promote positive values and, personal responsibility and those kinds of things. And you have to have some principles, right? Like a lot of these things aren't principles. Like even like, this idea of Canadian values, we need to protect Canadian values. Well, you ask a leftist what a Canadian value is, it's very different than what a PPC person says. It's much different than someone else. So, I don't know how you even determine that. And I don't want government determining that. I just want a government that protects the individual, that stays off my friggin' lawn. That's it.
Right. Exactly. So I just brought up this, where do we go wrong? Why does our government dictate to us instead of we the people dictate to our government the way it was intended? Do you want to answer that, or do you want me to take
Sure.
it?
Sure. Okay. Well, sure. This is a great question. Keep it real. It comes back to this is the problem with the state and with government, right? It always grows. It's like any enterprise, just like any business. If you run a business, your goal is to try to make more money, try to expand your enterprise, make it bigger, expand it. And government's no different. It wants to grow. If you're a bureaucrat in government, you don't want to run yourself out of a job. You want to make sure that you have job security. You want maybe a higher wage next year. You want to expand your department, expand your control. And so government will always tend to want to grow. Now, the other thing to think of here is something called public choice theory, which says that when profits and benefits are concentrated in a few, and the cost of those profits is spread out among the many, that it's going to be the few that control things. Now, an example of this is the dairy cartel, right? So dairy farmers make millions of dollars off the license and privilege they get from the state to be the only people that are allowed to produce and supply milk to Canadians. The rest of us, we pay, maybe a few extra dollars a year at the grocery store. Now, I don't notice that extra money because it's just, it's a few dollars. So I'm not going to go march on Ottawa. I'm not going to drive a convoy there to, dump a load of manure on Parliament Hill and protest that. On the other hand, the dairy farmers definitely are. I mean, they will lose millions if supply management is threatened. We'll gain a few dollars if supply management goes away, right? So the dairy farmers, so that's how all these special interest groups capture the government, because they have so much invested, they will fight tooth and nail for it. Whereas the rest of us, we just kind of put it like, liberty dies not by a sword through the heart, but by 1,000 paper cuts, right? So we get a little paper cut here, okay, no big deal. We get a little paper cut there, but these people that are making the, that are lobbying the government, they have a lot to lose and a lot to gain by fighting for their one issue. But when you add up all these single issues, it adds up to thousands and thousands of paper cuts for you and I. So the reason the government can control, why we the people don't control anything. Well, first of all, there is no such thing as we the people. Like there's no clear will. Like we're super divided, right? Which is why we need to restrain government, because we can never have like unity without force or something like that. So we need to get rid of that that idea. But then it's also that the special interests are always going to control the government. Now, if everyone rose up on a single issue and said, we're tired of paying $10 a month or $10 a year extra for milk, this shall not stand. And yeah, obviously we could take over, we could end supply management tomorrow. That's one thing. Now do that 5,000 times, get everyone to support each 5,000 thing. And you can see the problem with trying to roll back government. It's a real challenge. So at the end of the day, what we need are committed libertarians. And this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people en masse to adopt libertarianism so that they'll go after all 5,000 of those things at one time rather than one issue at a time. If that makes sense.
Right on. I just got another question here, Tim, if you want to try,
Sure.
Because we are talking about radicals, and obviously these people these environmentalists, the blockaders, I'm sure they would consider themselves radicals. I think
sure.
That's what Charlotte here is referencing. So how many radicals truly understand what they are protesting? Sometimes people protest for the hit and pleasure of joining into a group of radicals, in addition to rabble rousing.
Yeah, no, I mean, she's right on. I think a lot of people, they're looking for meaning and purpose in their life, right? I mean, this is the downfall of having an epidemic of fatherlessness out there. People don't know where to direct themselves. They lack that meaning, that purpose in their life, and they're trying to find it in all these areas. They're driven by emotionality, and they get in, it's like going to a rock concert. It's awesome. We're all cheering for the same thing. It's a good feeling to go to that. And these people are kind of addicted to the same thing. They're not thinking very clearly. It's difficult. I'm not a fan of protests myself. I have a psychological aversion to getting together in a giant group and chanting and like protesting things. I don't even know who we're talking to. I don't know, like, I don't agree with almost everyone here on every other issue. So, I have a problem with it, but yeah, I mean, I think she's right. I mean, like, these latest wait to wait and protests, right? The people blocking the pipeline. While I'm sitting here trying to figure out, the libertarian perspective, which is property rights, who owns that territory or that property. And so some leftists are saying, well, don't you support their property rights? And I don't know since when a leftist has ever supported property rights. But then, of course I do, but you guys aren't arguing for that, because it seems to me that most of those people want a pipeline. So wouldn't their property right be then to have a pipeline? Like, but they're not. They're fair weather propertarians, I guess, in that if it were the elected band, they're going to take whatever side supports abolishing the pipeline, right? So right now they're siding with hereditary ethno-nationalism over democracy, which is a weird thing, right? They're like, oh, hereditary ethno-nationalism, this is recognized, it's property rights, blah, blah, blah. This is what we have to support. But of course, they're only supporting that because of the pipeline. I mean, I've never seen them support hereditary ethno-nationalism anywhere else. So
Well,
So
actually, in reference to that, Tim, I uploaded a video, and the views have been, like I say, quite subdued since the whole PBC thing, anyways, because my videos would get like a few thousand, a couple thousand views. Typically now they're down to under 1,000. Some of them are only just into the hundreds a lot of times now. But I've been kind of reducing my lows, like not like I'm making a pile of money off it through YouTube, that's for sure.
right.
I gotta go months just to get $100 payout easily. But anyways,
Yeah, man.
but
Well,
I
hey,
uploaded.
I want to say something about that real quick. I mean, listen, kudos to you. Like this is the thing. Libertarians grind it out, man. Like we, you know, it's easy to be a fair weather libertarian, like jump on board a movement when it's hot. But most people jump on board the movement. They're just like these protesters. They jump on board a movement. As soon as that movement dies out, they disappear. They go off somewhere else, and they're like, "Man, take my ball, go home." Right? Meanwhile, the rest of us, like we're getting almost no support. We're continually grinding it out because it's not about what's popular; it's about what's right. So kudos to you. Anyways, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah. Well, I got to say that I've got selfish reasons for that. I have sons, you know, I have people. Sure. Well, I mean, obviously my own life, my wife, the people I care about. But like I say, the beautiful thing about the selfish individual is that everyone benefits as a result of that, if it's done morally, I should say, like, you know, in the proper sense. So if I want my freedoms and liberties, then that's what I want it for my kids, and I need everyone else, or as many people as possible, to accept and adopt those ideas. So yeah, I'm never going to give up on that. But basically what I was going to allude to is this whole thing with the blockade. I thought this is a perfect example where I can use the beautiful philosophy of liberty and the beautiful aspect of property rights and self-ownership. And I said, I'm going to run with this with the blockades. And yeah, almost exactly. And I said to the wife, you watch, this is usually the way it happens. The video, if I put Justin Trudeau in the heading and it's against him, lots of views. If it's something that's really important, and because what I was basically pointing out in terms of the blockades is property, if there was genuinely properly defined property rights in Canada, this whole thing wouldn't even be an issue, right? Because I don't believe the federal government should own all of what they deem as Canada, nor do I believe that these hereditary chiefs, just because at some point in time in the past they could lay claim over, what was it, 20,000 square miles? Like, really, like, I'm all for people having, you know, but no, I don't believe whether it's a band council, a tribal chief, a hereditary chief, like a democracy, or the federal government. I'm against any entity or individual or group claiming such vast swaths of land. Like I said, the simple way to fix this would be, is this pipeline, as it's being proposed, is it going through X person's, you know, property line on there? If it is, then this person has a genuine growth, right? Like, they have a genuine something to stand upon. Most of them, it's not, though. This is the problem with collective, and I called it collective, the problem with collective ownership. That, to me, this was the most perfect example to point out how ridiculous collective ownership is and see how detrimental it is, because you're not even actually helping none. You know, you got, like you say, you got First Nation people that are saying, I'm desperate, I need work here, for crying out loud. I want to be productive. I want to be self-sustained. I don't want to live on the reserve or get a welfare check. I want to be, but yet they're the ones that are, like I say, being told that, apparently by the media, right, that your concerns don't matter. But to me, all this would be so easily fixed and remedied if everyone had genuine property rights.
Absolutely.
But anyway, so just that was just me like bouncing that off my head, off the top of my head. And I thought, yeah, of course it didn't get many views. But anyways, I was just going to ask, because I'm not sure who AJ is a pretty good kid. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a pretty good guy. Actually, I think we would probably actually even say he's part of the Plaid Army, but he's not one of the. Yeah, I like AJ. He's a good guy. Anyways, what kind of libertarian support the dairy cartel? Now, I'm not sure. I don't think anyone said. I know for sure Tim did say it. I say it. So I
don't know any libertarian who supports the dairy cartel. Yeah. I definitely don't. Bennett doesn't. I mean, it's ridiculous. We don't support any cartels at all. You know, so, and we definitely don't support, you know, even like supply management in the cannabis industry. We were hard against that. I know Maxime Bernier didn't want to come out against that because he was trying to attract conservatives. So, you know, we're consistently anti-supply management in everything, right? We want free markets. We're radical free marketeers.
Okay. Let's see. I'm just trying to see what we got next here. Okay. Yeah, I would agree with AJ. Well, that's the big thing. If people would support that, of course, if everyone supported the NAP, well, we wouldn't be functioning. We wouldn't have such a thing as a state, would we? Right?
Yeah, that's true.
Because a lot of people, well, that's the thing. Actually, some people believe that that's the problem with the belief in authority, right? I would actually suggest that a substantial portion of the people don't actually believe that they're supporting the use of force. That's the problem. The fact that you come out of the education system and you don't even really realize what government is. If you even just have that minimal understanding, then it helps. What's this one here?
Rika, the hopeful voluntarist, says, do minarchist libertarians support the government cartel? Winky face. Yeah, Rika, I see what you're doing there, you cheeky monkey. I'll bring you back to the Dallas Accord. Let's work on 95% that we all agree on, and then the minarchists and anarchists can fight it out. Yeah, I mean, I think to be fair to minarchists, I think that a lot of them would say no, they don't support an enforced monopoly on government. It's just that, and I think if we ever got down to it and they saw another way that a certain service that the government, like courts, decentralized courts or something like that, I don't think they would be opposed to that. So I tend to believe that minarchists, their heart's in the right place, and they're, at the end of the day, they would support a voluntarist society. Once you get down to their proposed state, I don't think they would put up much of a fight if you could find voluntary ways of doing the things that they think the government has to do.
Right. Oh, first, actually, before I click on that, thanks, AJ, for the $5 donation. I appreciate that. So there was Lola Bell 61. The media is the message. There is also a motivator for radical ideologies that need to be addressed. Motivator for radical
media is the message. Well, I will say there's something to that too, right? She's right in that the way you construct arguments is the message in a lot of ways. Like people, if you're a fat guy and you're trying to sell a diet book, for example, the media is the message. It's like, okay, I'm not buying that. I don't believe he knows what he's talking about when it comes to diet. He's overweight. I get this a lot of times. I was talking with a fascist the other day who says the problem with libertarians and liberals is that they believe in universalism, right? So he's making a universal claim while trying to say universal. It's kind of like a guy yelling at someone that sound doesn't exist. The media is the message. Obviously, you believe sound exists. You're yelling at me, right? And so I think that there's something valuable to be taken here from Lulu Bell 61's message, which is that how we show up in these conversations, how we show up in what we're doing is super important. People don't care what you have to say until they know that you care, for example. And so yeah, I think that we really need to pay attention to our form and understand that is what people judge us on more than our message even. Like I can say all sorts of radical things, and I've said them on radio in front of people, and people nod their heads and kind of agree, and they're like, they're nice to me afterwards, right? But then other people say the exact same thing, but the way they say it is very abrasive, it's very condescending, it's very off-putting, and they get attacked, right? And it's the same message. And so how we show up matters. The media is the message. The way we, so that's a super important point.
Right on. I just put that up there for you, Tim, if you wanted to.
Tim, have you heard what has happened to Lethbridge? Theft, assaults, and general crime are all up since the safe consumption site opened. Government subsidizing bad behavior. Yeah, I've been hearing a lot. I've got some friends down there. I know the fire guys down there are just going nonstop, like EMS, and it's crazy. I before moving up to the Edmonton area here, I worked down at the Blood Tribe, which is just borders on Lethbridge area. And I mean, the first 24 hours, I had like 7 fentanyl overdoses, and I did CPR twice and had on. It was insane. It's insane down there, right? And yeah, I mean, I think these subsidizing these safe injection sites, that's not going far enough, right? It's cutting people off from personal responsibility. And the first thing, obviously, we need to legalize drugs, because most of the fentanyl overdoses I went to were people doing it recreationally. You know, they thought they were getting Oxy 80s. And, you know, in the past, if you wanted a recreational high, what you do is you go to your doctor, you tell your doctor that you have back pain and you need some Oxys. I mean, like a doctor can't falsify that you have back pain. They just have to believe you, and they write you a prescription, and then you go home, crush it, snort it, maybe sell some of your pills. But the people that were doing it then, they were getting safe highs because, you know exactly how much you're getting. It's quality controlled. All the things that you would expect in a marketplace are there. But then what happened is the government clamped down on prescription on physicians prescribing drugs. They said you can't prescribe drugs anymore, like Oxys. We're going to watch you. We're going to take away your license if we find out that you're over prescribing these things. At the same time, they went to big pharma and they said you have to make these drugs crush proof so that you can no longer crush them and snort them. So now it's no longer. So now where do people go to get the recreational drugs? Right now they got to go to the black market, and they're getting pills that are pressed to look like Oxy 80s, but are actually fentanyl, and they're dying, then they come up with, okay, well, the way we address this, they put a Band-Aid on it by saying, well, let's do safe injection sites. Safe injection sites, because they're using all these dangerous drugs. Let's just have a safe place for them to use it. So now you've got all these criminals and all these people that are in the underbelly and living in the shadows flocking to these places in neighborhoods where people don't want them, and all this crime happens. Yeah. So, you know, it's a difficult thing. But all these problems, criminality, the drug, addiction, like just this sense of despair and hopelessness, that to me, the root cause is in a breakup of the family, fatherlessness, of having broken homes, of having welfare statism. Like the government is so intertwined in this and has created this. So what we need to do, there's no easy bullet here to cure this, but what we can do is radically restrain government so that the families have a space to grow again, so that people have childhoods again, so that communities can be connected to each other again, so that we're providing value for each other rather than constantly pointing guns at each other. I think that'll go a long ways to cure violence, addiction, and all these crimes that we're seeing. And you got to let people, if they're, want recreational highs, or if they're addicts or whatever, you got to let them have the safe drug of choice that, and that'll keep them out of one local area, right? And disperse them more, decentralize them to where they have more support and intervention, I guess.
Yep. So there's just another one there, and this one actually is one of those things I've kind of had to reconcile with my own. That's the thing. But once you have a core philosophy and principles, then all you're doing is seeing how everything fits within it, right? But I'm a believer in tariffs to protect Canadian jobs. How does Tim feel about this? Feel about tariffs? Now, before you go into that, Tim, my initial thoughts is, obviously I'm not a proponent of tariffs, right? It's a state imposing additional costs, which always gets caught. It's passed on to the consumer, the end consumers, the ones going to. But here's my issue, and you can kind of bounce this off, or I can bounce this off you as well, is because this plantation we're on, called Canada, right, does have trade agreements and deal with other states all around the planet. And because of the fact that the outsourcing of jobs and the mass immigration thing, I do see, and this has all been reported, not just by people in the alternative media or libertarians, but even the established media has basically said that wage stagnation in Western countries has been about 4 decades now. Every time you think you're getting an increase based on, inflation, and then of course, the subsidies of foreign workers in terms of coming here to get an added layer of benefit or advantage over like the domestic citizen, or the products because they're all made in cheaper jurisdictions, or importing of cheaper labor. Like there is some area where I can understand you and I as libertarians, the principal position is I'm against tariffs, but because we function in a state where there's other states imposing additional layers of costs imposed on the domestic, the chattel in Canada. What is your I'm kind of curious to know what you think of that yourself.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't think it's the government's government's role to protect jobs or something like that. I don't think the proper goal of any economic policy is to promote jobs, right? We don't want jobs. In fact, you know, the history of progress has been unemployment, right? I mean, it used to be that we were 100% employed, that we would work from before dawn till after dusk to put food on the table. And the thing that has led to the greatest flourishing and like short work weeks and short work days has been, you know, the division of labor, property rights, you know, technological progress that emerges from that. And so this international division of labor, as Adam Smith points out, has led to incredible flourishing and productivity so that we don't have to work, so that we can live the lives of kings and queens of yesteryear on a modest income today. And that's because of productivity increases. So we want to increase productivity. Now, it doesn't increase productivity. Tariffs don't increase productivity because it means that the cost of producing things becomes even higher and higher. In fact, you know, ideally, like, people are worried about robots taking their jobs or immigrants or whatever. I think that's the wrong mindset. I want robots to take our jobs. I want to employ robots myself. I want my own, you know, ideally, if I could have a robot that could get all my food, produce everything I need, and I'd never have to buy anything from anyone, that would be a good thing. Now, I wouldn't even have to have a job anymore. That would be fantastic. So I think that we have to get rid of this idea that we need to protect jobs or something like that. That's kind of a statist concept. That's even a leftist concept. Like, you know, Bernie Sanders or someone might say we need to put Americans to work. So we need this group of people to dig holes and this group of people to fill them in. Well, everyone's got 100% jobs, but our economy's in the tank because we're not producing anything of value. So we need the market to produce value, and we need, you know, if people can make things for way cheaper over there, then that makes us richer because now we can use those and implement them into the things that we're better at or whatever. We can implement those things. And, you know, I understand what you're saying in that, like, okay, maybe in China or maybe another country there, the state is heavily subsidizing a particular industry. So they're able to make things for super cheap and then dump them on the Canadian market. But essentially that is like them giving us foreign aid. So China is essentially their state is giving us foreign aid. And I'm like, how does that make us poorer? That's just like them sending us a bunch of free stuff. I don't understand how that's worse. Okay, you don't have to work making that thing anymore. You're going to have to find new work, and I have some sympathy for that. As things change, it's difficult. But listen, that's been the history. That's been the story throughout history. We have to adapt to changing conditions. People who once made horse and carriages lost their jobs because of the automobile. You know, and we have to adapt and change and learn how we can provide value. And if there are tariffs imposed, that means you're artificially propping up people who otherwise wouldn't be providing value, as much value. They're not as economically productive. Those things are more economically productive made somewhere else. And, you know, that ought to be the goal. And that frees us up to do other things that are productive. So, so I don't believe. Now, that being said, you know, if it were a choice between, say, like GST or tariffs in how the government was funded, I would probably prefer tariffs. I would prefer tariffs over GST. You know, I think there can be an argument made there, but you know, I don't think that it makes good economic sense. I haven't met a good economist, whether it's Milton Friedman, Hayek, Mises, any free market economist who would support that.
Right. I think just a little bit of a pushback just to kind of think, so we kind of open this up to a little bit of different thinking here. I'm totally on board with you here, but once again, my brain now always goes into this thing, go the full pure libertarian mindset, but recognize that we also live in a world that isn't filled with libertarians. So my thing is, I'm totally with you 100% on board. Absent of government state intervention in the economy, I'm no barriers to trade, right? Or integrate as far as I'm concerned. But because of the confluence of central bank devaluing the purchasing power, because of government, for especially for people on the lower end on the socioeconomic spectrum, where if you can bring people from countries that are migrating from such low socioeconomic development that they'll come to, let's say, Canada and work for, like, take a job that they might do it for minimum wage, where someone like you or I doing that same job, because we become accustomed to living under the inflation, where we always try to stay above it, right? We're constantly, it's like dog chasing his tail. You're trying to stay above that inflation, because unlike government workers, we don't get wages adjusted and pegged to inflation. So I think my biggest thing is, so you already have the central banks along with government policies that's given, you know, people from other countries an automatic advantage. And like I say, the central bank, by the constant printing and devaluing the purchasing power, destroying our wages. So there's not in the purchasing power. I do kind of see where they're and I even to a certain degree understand Trump with the whole thing with the Make America Great Again and bringing a lot of the manufacturing back, because like I love the concept of like we're all on plantations or farms. I love the fact there's many different competing firms, but I would want to live on a farm that treats its livestock right.
Right. No, I understand where you're getting from. I mean, essentially, you know, what the argument is that our citizens are used to a type of welfare, and you know, we can't just rip the bandage off. It's not fair to them, kind of thing, right? And you know, I'm sympathetic to that, and maybe there's a staged way we can do it. You know, the other thing I'll say is, like, we have these weird programs like what is it, the temporary foreign workers program, for example, where you have people coming over, this cheap labor coming over, sponsored or directly by a company or something like that. They're only allowed to work for that company. That company can, like, you know, I heard of one guy working at a kiosk in a mall in Victoria who was from the Philippines, and his condition of employment was he had to room and board with his employer. So that gets automatically deducted from his paycheck. Every time he looked at his iPhone or did some minor infraction at work, he was fined $100. That came off his paycheck. At the end of the month, he was making almost nothing. Okay, how does a Canadian worker compete with that? Right now, the problem is this guy couldn't just quit the job and go work at another kiosk where they're going to treat him right. He had to stay working there. So he's essentially slave labor, right? And so this, again, this is a real problem. And what we need to do is get rid of these laws that make that put foreign workers under a different legal regime than our own citizens, right? And so that for sure I'm sympathetic with. And you know, so, but you know, as far as you know, I'm sympathetic, but you know, my mind is different. It's entrepreneurial. It's like, okay, if I get taken over by people agreeing to work for minimum wage, who are going to ride the ambulance for minimum wage and do as good a job as me, well, I'm in a place of privilege already. I've generated some wealth. I've been making a good wage. I understand the system better than them. I'm going to start my own ambulance company and employ these people, and I'm going to get rich off this cheap labor, right? And I'm going to be providing more product for the customers. The cost of ambulance services is going to go down. The dollar is going to go farther, right? So cheap labor actually increases our buying power, and it increases our flourishing. You know, it'd be like having all our jobs replaced by robots, and we have to now become, it's difficult for us at first because we're used to working as a robot essentially on the assembly line. Now a robot takes that job, but now I'm free to do other things, and I don't need to be a robot anymore. Now I can be an employer of robots or something like that. And so it requires a different mindset, and we're not used to that mindset because we've gone through public school where we're taught to be a cog in the system. We are taught to be robots. We're taught to be obedient machines, basically. And so of course the machines and the immigrants that act as machines threaten us because that's all we know how to do. And so I definitely have some sympathy for that.
Yeah. Well, I think at the end of the day, because there are a lot of contributing factors, but I think at the end of the day, what would probably be a quick remedy, or at least help lead us in a direction where it's not so much where you'd have to rely on that tariffs or anything, is just if we had actual legalized ability to use whatever we want in terms of money, right?
Yeah.
Because of the fact,
I mean, you're right. The central bank is the biggest problem here. That is, you know, it's kind of like a welfare state that's artificially propping up prosperity. Eventually that bubble's going to pop, and we are in for it whether we like it or not. I mean, it's not sustainable. And we're pooched because we've now been trained to not be productive because we've been propped up by this central bank, which says, and we've been protected from any kind of competition, and so we've become weak and unable to provide value. And now, how are we going to what are we going to do when the central bank collapses and no longer props us up? It's a dilly of a pickle.
Yeah. Well, that is in turn, especially now with digital cryptocurrencies. Plus, we have things like gold and silver already. But I mean, I can only imagine what kind of space would be opened up if it was completely legal to have people conjure up or construct something that they want to deem as a means of measuring value, of exchanging value, or something to, retain that value for future use. So what money is supposed to mean. If we had, we weren't all forced to use the Canadian dollar, and we could have some competing currencies, let's say, or means of exchange and all that, then I'm sure there would be ways that we wouldn't have to worry about, the constant devaluation, because what's destroying why we're not seeing those wage increases is by natural extension the fact that central banks have devalued and destroyed the purchasing power. So that's why even minimum wage, every time the government bumps up the minimum wage, right, then all the parasites and everyone, oh look, there's extra money to be had here, right? Government loves increasing the minimum wage, and then they can increase their bottom lines and their coffers as well. So yeah, I think a lot of these problems would be solved just by legalizing, once again, money.
Yeah. By the way, I would like to see Maxime Bernier's answer to this question. How does he feel about tariffs?
Yes,
he follows the Austrian School of Economics, so he knows that tariffs are not good. He knows they harm the economy. He knows that the proper policy for government is to promote productivity, not jobs. He knows all these things, and yet I doubt that he would go on record saying these things, because he would be worried about losing support, because people don't understand the economics behind it. They've been told all this propaganda and they haven't really studied it, right? So anyways.
Yeah, so Stevie more or less asked it. So it's right in line with the same question.
Yeah. I saw something there about how he's in favor of a strong currency rather than increasing the minimum wage and that sort of thing. Yeah, I completely agree. You know, our currency has been continually devalued. And, we need to improve our buying power. And as buying power increases, we can take less and less of a wage. Like a smaller wage that buys more is better than a big wage that buys less. And right now we're getting bigger and bigger wages, which don't go as far as a smaller wage went, 20 years ago. So the country's manipulating their currency to take our manufacturing and other jobs away. We hit them with a tariff. Well, again, what we're talking about is a foreign country giving us foreign aid, right? They're providing us with free goods and services, right? That their own taxpayers support. I mean, I just don't see that as a bad thing. I mean, if they want to destroy their economy by doing that, that's their business, I guess. I would encourage them not to. But again, we're not entitled to a business manufacturing or doing jobs here. That we're just not, like I get my iPhone, I guess it's made in China for cheap. I wouldn't buy it if it was made in Canada, because it would be $5,000 and I just couldn't afford it. So I don't know how it would make us richer if I was forced to pay $5,000 for an iPhone just so I could support some jobs. It's kind of like the broken window fallacy, where there's this idea among Keynesians that the way you stimulate an economy is you go around a town and you break all the windows, because then all the window manufacturers have all these jobs, right? You've just boosted the jobs in the community. And well, does that make the community richer? And no, it doesn't, because you're missing the unseen cost. Because now the people that are buying those services, that are paying for those windows, are poorer. They have to pay for services that they otherwise wouldn't have had to pay for. And that's essentially what these tariffs are doing. That you're having to buy things that or pay more for things that you normally wouldn't. So all that money that would normally get invested into productive means or spent on things that provide value are now going to things that artificially they shouldn't have to. So you're crippling an economy by doing that.
Yeah, I just noticed that Ian joined the chat there.
Ian, you have missed much. You've missed a lot. We've just solved all the world's problems. We've figured out the answer to the meaning to life, and you missed it, man. And I'm sorry. I'd love to recap. You're gonna have to watch.
Holy crap, Tim! You said the exact same response I was going to. That's insane. I was going to say the exact same thing, but you got me. You beat me to it. But yeah, we solved all the problems. Well, I was going to say 99%. We're still working on that last one, but yeah. But anyways, I'm just going to check. And Tim, by the way, I'm not sure how long we've been going, but anytime you feel like you've had, if you want, because I could freaking ramble on forever, basically. But I'm sure
as long as there's questions and people are interested, I can kick it, man.
Okay, cool. I'm just checking to see what else we got here. Okay, got to go later, dudes and dudettes. Take care. allowing, what was this about? Allowing China into the WTO and then allowing them to break every rule, and really don't like this is what's going on. Yeah, that's the problem with the, not having genuine free trade and having to deal with these authoritarian regimes. But kind of like what Tim is saying is, I just can't help but think that, yeah, given the option, I just can't help but think that, freedom does seem to be giving people more choice, more liberty would seem to be.
And I mean, you're going to run into that problem even regionally. Let's say we just totally close the border to trade and to immigration or anything, right? There are going to be some communities that are just better at producing things than others in Canada that are going to do it for cheaper, right? And now you could say, okay, well, because of that policy suite over in Calgary, Edmonton isn't as competitive. We're losing jobs in manufacturing to Calgary because they have a lower tax rate or better conditions or whatever. And so what we could say is what we need is tariffs and we need to control trade from Calgary so that we can stimulate. Well, that doesn't make us richer. No. Right? You can take it right down to the, at any level, and you can see it doesn't really work.
Yeah, I have to think that, and like I say, as the wiser I get, the more knowledge I get, the more I realize I need to learn more. that's the crazy. Right. So
yeah, I mean, the thing is too, like most people agree that having open provincial borders is a good thing, right? Like me being able to go across the border and get cheaper beer or find a job in Saskatchewan or whatever. I mean, that's a good thing. Moving, the free flow of labor and goods and services and all that kind of thing is good. So, why would that be any different, internationally than nationally or whatever? And I don't see how it would. But.
Yeah, well, and if you think about, like, and I'm sure you have, and I have, and I've many of them multiple times watch, whether it's Milton Friedman or reading Hayek or Adam Smith, The Wealth, or even just all the many documentaries that you can find on YouTube that for people that don't necessarily like to read, like that's the beautiful thing about having these resources at our disposal. And once you've heard the reasoning, the logic behind proponents of unfettered free market capitalism and trade is, yes, there's always going to be times like Tim's alluding to where you can say, but once again, you just can't help but think freedom, at the end of the day, freedom has got to be a better choice than any kind of protectionist racket, but of course, that's the thing. There are going to be competing models around the world that are going to destroy that freedom. But if you promote it yourself, like that's just like in my neighborhood. I'm sure there's people that do things a lot less freely than I do. Like I raised my kids actually because I did kind of have not just parents, but everyone in my community seemed like it was the going thing when I was growing up to beat kids. Like that was just, you breathe, of course you beat kids. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
But because I did kind of grow up in that kind of environment, that was one of the things that I made most dominant in when I was raising my kids is I'm going to try it in a manner where I don't even spank them. Like, but I, I would still raise my voice. They, not everything was perfect, but I didn't use the actual physical thing because, like I said, that was just too prevalent. And I know even as a kid, it was this constant every time I would, and I use this example lots, where like the parents saying you get into a fight with some kid on the school ground or something, and the parent or the principal is either strapping you with the rubber strap or your parents smacking you across the face and don't ever hit. It's like, well, wait a minute, like, fuck, you just taught me that's the best practice here, right? You're telling me not to hit, but meanwhile you're hitting me. So yeah, I guess leading by example. Like I say, there's going to be bad actors just like it's in your community or around the world. But yes, if you can, just like what the U.S., the reason why the U.S. became so profoundly successful in such a short amount of time is because they did have a lot more freedoms. Yes, there might have been, if you go back through that history, I'm sure you could find where some people were harmed along the way. But if you look at it overall, was it a net plus, a net benefit? I would say it definitely was. Of course, it's not perfect. History's not written where it's not a storybook. It's not a fairy tale, but yeah, freedom I think would definitely be more beneficial.
Right. Yeah. AJ Illicit says it's good, but we can't forget that we still have a government manipulating things. So the first thing you don't want to do is open your borders. Start with taxing your citizens less before opening the gates. And I agree with that. And that's what our policy reflects, right? I mean, typically, like the difference between an open border libertarian and a closed border libertarian is that one is an no particular orderist and the other is an orderist, right? And so if we're saying, yeah, we need some controls over immigration now, it's because we think the order in which you get your freedoms back kind of matter, right? And that you can't have an open floodgate while you have a giant welfare state, because you'll just attract all the welfare migrants. And although I will say, hold on, I don't have it here, but I recently got Brian Kaplan's book called Open Borders, and it addresses all these things. I have to say, it makes a pretty convincing argument for open borders. So I might have to rethink some of the things, but I do think it still matters, the order in which you do this. And I think right now, particularly with an unrestrained democracy, let's say, where there's literally no restraint on how big government can grow, that if you attract a bunch of statists and welfare queens to Canada, that we're just going to get a bigger and bigger government. So I agree with AJ Elicits here that we need to address our in-house problems first of a giant government, and then we can open up the borders more.
Yeah, I just brought this comment up on the screen just because I've done probably, I would say, 8 or 9 videos in the past just talking about referencing Gen X as a right. demographic. And mostly I do notice, that's the crazy part, is I do notice a lot of the people that would identify as libertarians obviously are people from that Gen X. And what I think, what I kind of try to correlate that with is Gen X, we would I think would be considered that generation, and it's just by sheer happenstance luck and the way things had unfolded historically. But our parents, the boomers, although depending on some Gen Xers might have had parents that were from the silent generation, even depending on if they were older. But typically, if you had someone like the boomer as a parent or anything, is a lot of them, those were the years, the 50s and 60s and then the 70s, let's say, those were the years when a lot of our parents, or our mothers, I should say, were going off into the workforce quite normal. It was considered quite normal at that point in time. So we were kind of discussed and talked about as being latchkey kids, a lot of us. Actually, they've done entire documentaries basically pointing this stuff out. And so we kind of learned, like, I know even myself, my personal experience is, and it's personally perfectly conducive with being a libertarian, is because we weren't really micromanaged. Everyone was off doing their own thing, our parents, right? And trying to live this new modern lifestyle of both parents, and trying to the house and the picket fence and all that stuff. So yeah, they were preoccupied, which left us Gen Xers kind of to our own devices to figure things out kind of on our own, which I did. Like, I love using the example going out in the woods. You could have 12 kids and you'll figure it out. Like, you don't even have to know what game you're going to play, but you can figure out a game, set up the rules and everything within an hour. And the first person that starts cheating or messing around, like the rest of the people in the group. So we didn't have to have it taught to us top down. We actually got to experience it in a state of anarchy where we had to figure out the rules as we go, right? So I think it did kind of place Gen X. And because, of course, after the 70s, you have the time when, Nixon took it was 1971 when they severed the ties entirely. And that's when the inflation really started ramping up, right, in terms of and government. Like, that's also the time. If you look how that worked out, we Gen Xers experienced so much. So we got to experience things from the more anarchist, the more having more freedoms, to seeing how much more encroaching the state has become in comparison, contrast to the stories that we heard about from our parents, because the state was much like, you got to think about boomers until they brought about, or the silent generation, depending on what age range they were at, but until they brought out the welfare state, the socialized healthcare, these people, I remember hearing stories about how self-sufficient all these communities were, and everything. You had, churches, like, to me, of course, and even to this day, actually in the East Coast, it's still enshrined, because there's still a lot of old people here, is the whole thing with using charity from the church rather than government. Now, if that expanded out to the rest of society, it'd be much better. But I think it's more of a small rural thing. That's the only thing I've seen left, is the people that are still in the rural communities. Yeah, they're seemingly more close knit. But I think us Gen Xers do have a kind of unique position in history, because we've got to see both sides of the coin. We kind of learned, not through our own personal experiences, at least when we were younger, we experienced a lot more freedoms than what the younger kids do today, because everything's monitored and scrutinized. But we got to actually watch the rise of the state as it took place, and what a profound effect it had on the breakdown of the family, on the breakdown of culture, of society. So it does give us quite a bit of insight. And I think that, and I've even said before, like, we are the leaders of liberty in the 21st century, predominantly. Like I said, there's exception to the rule, but it does seem that most of the people that are, the ones that are putting liberty front and center, do seem to come from the Gen X cohort.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Do you agree with Tommy Gunn that we have it worse? I don't know. I think I would rather be an Xer than a millennial or something like that. I think boomers definitely had it best. They're definitely balling off of all the generations that came after them. They kind of foisted all the debt and the bubbles and all the wealth they created on that. I read somewhere recently that a house for millennials is like 20 times more costly than it was for boomers or something like that. And I mean, that's all because of the policies they supported, all the central banking, all the cheap credit, all the free money, and of course they want, they want to protect jobs and protect their wealth and protect, we need to, if we're going to get anywhere, we need to disabuse ourselves of that boomer mentality. I think you're right that Gen X probably isn't the best state to do that, because we were kind of the sons and daughters of boomers, and we saw, that mentality, and we kind of rebelled against it. And now we're kind of the go-betweens between the millennials who see themselves as victims and the boomers who see themselves as victims and are always losing their minds. And we're just like, guys, look, we got to disabuse ourselves of this victim mentality if we're going to get anywhere.
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of the millennials, and having 2 millennial age sons myself. It's kind of crazy actually, because some of them, I had my sons early, obviously, but I seen quite a glaring divide between the millennials that were raised by boomers. So a lot of the professional boomers that, put focus on career, they have kids basically the exact same age as mine, because they waited till they were into their 30s and 40s to have their family, whereas I had mine in my teen years. And I did see that glaring divide. But as far as the demographic in general, yeah, the millennials, I wouldn't trade places for them. I feel terrible about the fact that, like you say, and no one's thinking about, I mean, people are talking about it, but it's going to be 20 years out, 30 years out when this is really going to hit home, and how many of the young people today are putting off having kids themselves and starting a family. And not because of anything they've done. I mean, I know a lot of the older people say, oh, they're just entitled. But listen, between the student debts, the cost of housing, I mean, they've got lots of goodies. I mean, you might be able to look at a millennial today and say, oh, look at all the toys you can play with. But really, that's all they have going for them. Right?
Yeah.
That's to be...
Well, yeah. And no, I agree. It's always bugged me. I saw this whole generational thing from the boomers coming out about 15 years ago, where in the workplace, I saw pamphlets about how entitled millennials were and how, and I'm like, who are you to call these people entitled? You're the most entitled generation ever. Yeah. There may be some truth to this fact, but look, you cannot throw stones. You are living in a glass house. You have had cheap credit. You have had, cheap jobs. You've foisted, even with like old age pensions, boomers could expect, the original contributors to old age security could expect to get 17 times back what they put into it. And now millennials will never get back what they put into it. They might get 50% back what they put into it. Now, how does that fare? How did that work? It's because, all the policies have been generated by boomers to enrich them and benefit them. And then they sit there and judge millennials for being entitled. Well, I mean, they're your kids, you created that. So, yeah.
Exactly. Well, as a parent, as an adult, that's the whole point. I have to lead by example. And if I'm being hypocritical, I even pointed out myself, if I'm doing something or saying something and I'll catch myself midstream. It's like, well, no, you got to lead by example. I don't even like really talking about generations, because it even sounds a little too collectivist, as if we're all the same, right? But there are certain things that you can generalize. And, I'm obviously doing it just for the purpose of trying to discuss, what is actually happening, taking place. But yeah, in terms of the boomers and the Gen X's and the millennials, we've all had some, benefits of our life, but yeah, the boomers, if there was such thing as a Ponzi scheme, just by sheer fact of the way, like I say, the way the monetary system changed when all these healthcare systems were implemented, is the boomers did kind of get in very early, right? So if you're going to have any Ponzi or pyramids, then they did get in on the bottom floor. And today, like, even if you look at the housing market, I mean, how fortunate for them to have bought a $20,000 house, and you can now, if you still lived in that house, you could sell that thing for like $1 million if you're in one of the major urban centers. So you're sitting on a proverbial gold mine, but without taking into account, but your kids, that if you could sell your $20,000 home that you bought for $1 million, well, does your kid have $1 million? No. Well, then you're you yourself are pricing them out of the market, right? In some way, right? So this is an issue that I know it probably touches home to a lot of people, because it does. This is something that affects every household, right? Politics, maybe not so much, but well, I mean, I guess this is kind of politics, but I guarantee that this demographic thing is something that has a profound effect. Anyways, I just want to say thanks to Good Times for the $5 donation. I hope you guys do more shows. Great info. I really enjoy this too. Yeah, Tim's a great guy to talk to. Excellent guy to talk to. Cool. I don't want to muscle in too hardcore though, because him and David's got their thing going on. Actually, after you guys started doing that, I was like, damn it, just a little bit too late in the game, because I would have loved to have. I even started a thing with me and my son. I don't know if I mentioned this before. We were going to do a thing called Liberty Hunters Podcast, and we were going to do it father and son thing, but he kind of got preoccupied at that time because he was working real heavy at doing security work and putting in some crazy hours, and it was so hard to coordinate stuff. But I was thinking, geez, it would have been nice to have two Canadian libertarian guys, doing this kind of show. But you and David are doing, like I say, I love watching you guys go on, and like I say, you compliment each other a lot. But I'll definitely be reaching out to talk to you, because like I say, I want to do what I can, and I'm sure you do. Well, that's why we're having this discussion today. Whatever we can to try to affect the culture in this country. We'll talk about some politics, but for the most part, like you and like myself, is we just want to talk about what are some great ideas that we can all implement in our own personal lives, right? To kind of try to affect the culture of this country, because we have to lead in some way, and we have to lead by example if we expect, especially if we want the younger people, to follow in our footprints. We kind of got to do it in a manner that it looks beneficial to them. Right now, the state looks very beneficial to a lot of millennials, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And listen, I should probably go. I got to spend some time with the family, but appreciate you having me on. We'll do this again. I really enjoyed this conversation. We've burnt up almost 3 hours. Wow. Thanks, guys, for hanging in there. Thanks for the great questions. Thanks for supporting Bennett and his operation here. And I see there's like a flat earth debate going on, and all sorts of things going on in there. So I'll leave you guys to the lively discussion there. But thanks again. Appreciate it.
No problem. Have a good one, Tim. We'll talk to you again soon.
You bet. Bye.
I'm going to stick around here and answer a few more questions myself, just because I know I think there's another couple super chats here. So just give me a second here, folks. Yeah, Tim's a great guy. Really good guy. By the way, yeah. Oh, let me change that. I'm going to change that banner down there again. Go check out Tim's website here. Or his YouTube channel here. Let me switch that up so you guys know what it is again. There it is. Okay, back. So AJ, thanks again for the donations there, AJ. I appreciate it, buddy. Thank you for addressing my comments. Oh, shoot, this was to Tim. Crap. Sorry, a little late to that. I'll make sure Tim gets that though, AJ. Much appreciated. I apologize if I mischaracterized your positions. Tim won't take no offense to that. I think he clarified it anyways, but no worries, AJ. Back in the day, we had, what's this Tommy gun? We had a community back in the day, and we held accountable for our actions and high moral values. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Even when you're talking about government, keeping things as close, when government was more localized, you could hold people to account. Not that I'm a fan of the state or politics, but the more local things are, the more you can hold people to account, because those people got to go to the same grocery stores, right? They got to go to the same banks. That is important. Keep things at least as close as to the community level as you possibly can. And no, community, not communism. Oh, AJ, what's this? Don't go after the boomers, man. You'll regret it. Yeah, I know. Well, there are a lot of boomers that watch our videos and stuff. And like I say, I always try to use the caveat, not all. But I mean, come on, it's a fairly descriptive. And I mean, the reason why it obviously, has such a profound effect is because it probably, that cognitive dissonance, right? If someone's getting that outraged, like I don't get outraged if someone says something about a Gen Xer and it doesn't actually pertain to me at all. I'll be like, okay, well, they're talking about someone other than me, obviously, because that's not me, right? But we do have to admit there is some demographic differences, and like I say, history, the way that the welfare state unfolded, under whose watch, who had so much dominant power and influence in like the corporate world, social policy, economic policy, political policy. It has been boomers for a long time. Even today, I won't bring up any particular names, but even if you go out there in the workforce, there's a lot of younger people from my generation, or even the millennials, where they go to find these jobs that, not like they're clamoring for some of these remedial or kind of mindless jobs, but they need jobs, they need incomes. And a lot of them are saying, well, Jesus Christ, every time I go, there's only like 2 or 3 young people, and the rest of the staff is nothing but a bunch of boomers that are retired already, getting a pension, but they want to work anyways because, I don't know, they're bored at home. Maybe especially if they're women, maybe they don't have a husband anymore, right? It's like, even that alone, if is it because most of them are just dead set on working? I don't know. Or it might be because they just didn't save up enough because the government, destroyed their ability to save anyways. I mean, there's so many layers there to even start to delve into the effects. But yeah, like when at some point in time, the boomer generation, at some point in time, that cohort does kind of have to get the hell out of the way and let the next generation or two kind of at least have some sway or influence. Because that's the problem, especially when you're talking about politics too. Because I will talk about at least the political side of things. This way I'm not targeting individuals, right? I'm not going to target boomer individuals, because if you're a decent boomer, there's lots of great boomers. But think about it. As a demographic, the boomers, right, have this gigantic, it's called the boomer bulge for a reason. Like we're demographic wise because the greatest and silent generation had to have so many kids because of so many people that died from the world wars and stuff to repopulate, right? So they had this big giant mass of kids, like on average 6 or 7 kids apiece. So you have that's a large voting base. And then Gen Xers, because like I say, we're actually one of the smaller demographics. Actually, I think Gen Zers might even be higher in numbers than Gen Xers. So you got the big boomer bulge. Then you got Gen Xers, which is a much smaller demographic. And then you got a bigger demographic that's not quite as big as the boomers, although I think it's pretty close. But then you got the millennials. So you got 2 huge counterbalances in terms of demographics that can be a big force that can really have a massive effect or shift the political culture, right? Or the political landscape, which are the millennials and the boomers. Whereas Gen Xers, it almost, to me, it seems like we might go through our entire adult working lives, like get to the point where you hit retirement age, roughly around 65. It almost seems to me that Gen Xers might it might get to the point where we have had no power, influence, or sway over even our own freaking lives, never mind affecting or changing policy, right? Because there seems to be always going to be someone, because of majority rule, democracy, right? If you're in the minority, which Gen X's are, we are the minority, we are a minority demographic in comparison and contrast to the boomers and millennials. It's under democracy and majority rule, you're never going to have any power. You're never going to have any sway or influence. Well, other than things that you could do online, like create videos and, write publications or articles and stuff. But yeah, it seems like Gen Xers, and now I'm kind of on the upper end of the Gen Xer. I'm going to be 50 this year. But yeah, I don't know. Like I say, for another 15 years to go by and still not have society look anything or resemble anything like me or the kind of values or principles I stand for, could very well go that way. And depending on if the millennials, like a lot of the millennials are being told about supporting socialism and big government because of the way they're being educated. So we might, as Gen Xers, go from being economically enslaved, but to a lesser degree, I'll admit, because it wasn't done purposely, I would suggest. But from the boomers having so much power and influence and benefiting from so many of the entitlements because they were the ones early on, to we might, as Gen Xers, go from our parents ruling over us to our kids, right? That'll be pretty messed up. Wait a minute. There should have been some point in time where we had, I could rule over myself, right? But anyways, that's just me kind of thinking it. So, but yeah, I know. Well, people get pissed off if you talk because there are some negative connotations. I get it. But once again, that's where a person should recognize that not all, right? We're not talking about all boomers, but a lot of boomers, you must know that what I describe, it's a reality. Anyone who uses the term boomer is lost. Well, why would that be? Pseudoscientists lost? I don't even understand what that could possibly mean. Mass immigration. Well, that's the thing. The boomers are benefiting from mass immigration because if their kids can't afford to buy the house, well, maybe these immigrants can, right? So like I say, this is a reality. Gen X, remember. Yeah, remember us. We really were here. We really did exist. Yeah. Well, that's why we got to, grow our voices, so we can affect and have more of an influence. But like I say, it's a lot easier said than done, as I've recognized and acknowledged. We remember how things used to be. Yeah. The nostalgia, I'm sure that goes for the boomers too, because I'm sure the boomers, there's some great times they would have had in the 50s and 60s, I would imagine too. They look like it anyways. Look like they would have been good times. Yeah, right on. Yeah, my dad's dead. My stepfather, he's a boomer as well, but he's cool. And my real dad, he was a boomer. He would have been, I'm sure he still would have been cool. He was cool when he was alive. So yeah, of course, not all, right? Totally with you there, buddy. Actually going to start quoting Peter Zian or George Friedman. You're out of your lane. Not sure where you're going with that. Do you believe in gravity? Isn't it? Okay, boomers take offense to the term boomer. Where'd that go? Well, is it the term boomer or the okay boomer? I know the okay boomer thing is, well, I think it is meant as a negative connotation, an insult. So I can kind of understand why boomers kind of feel insulted by the okay boomer thing, right? Because I think it was kind of done as a slight. Only 20% is in the bank now. Well, there's definitely going to be some potential ramifications to these unfunded liabilities and these promises made to the boomers as they all go off into retirement. Yeah, it's how this is going to be paid for. Well, like I say, I think they're relying on mass immigration as a way to hope subsidize, because it seems like the successive generations of the old stock Canadians just don't have enough built up capital or wealth to be able to pay for it. They don't. No, they don't. God wants to tax the money you leave behind to your kids. We need to say no. Oh, government. Yeah, I know. That's ridiculous. That is so ridiculous. What was that? Estate taxes or whatever. Yeah, that's just foolish, right? I mean, come on. Leave people's money alone. Millennials are offended about everything, such NPCs. No. Some, like the offended thing, though. That's the thing. The offended, if I could think about all of the problems and issues there are in the world or Western societies, is it the fact that millennials are seemingly over sensationalized or hyping their bleeding heart morality? I see that's, it's some of it seems pretty crazy, pretty outrageous, pretty wild, way out there. But geez, that's a whole lot better. Like, if my biggest problem I had with millennials was the fact that they virtue signal their morality too much, I can't say. The problem is I hope they don't use government as their means to an end. If the millennials grow up and start to use government as a means to their end, right, and make the rest of us have to pay for the original sins, that's where I would say it's going to be quite scary. However, if millennials are just going to find ways to try to unwind the state in some way, although I don't know, like I say, because socialism is touted so much. I don't predict the future, But of all the problems and issues I have with millennials, it's not the fact that they want to virtue signal their empathy for people they perceive as, disenfranchised or oppressed in some way. That's not a bad thing, right? They're being taught the wrong thing. They're being taught to target the wrong people, to blame the wrong people, right? Because they're being told to blame people based on their skin color or their sex, like the patriarchy, right? But the fact that they're predominantly concerned with virtue signaling, their morality, or the fact that they want to help people that are in need or disenfranchised, like I say, that's not the end of the world for me. It's not the end of the world for me. So I guess that's what I would say to that. Tax on tax, yeah, carbon tax on tax, fuel tax, carbon tax, you get tax on tax on tax. You get tax. I think it still does. I haven't had money in the bank in forever, but I remember when I did have some money in the bank, you get taxed on your interest. Like, really though? Really? I suppose you wouldn't be getting too much tax and interest at the rates they are today, would you? Taxation is theft, definitely. Hashtag taxation is theft, 100%. That's something you got to hammer home on. I love the taxation is theft. It's one of those things where you just to kind of shocks people's sensibility. And then when you delve down into it, like most people, they don't know how to think about it, but at least you can tell there's something in their mind or like there's something in their brain that recognizes, yeah, it kind of is, isn't it? Right? They'll fight it to the nail, but where'd we go there? AJ, where'd he go? Where'd we go? Sarcastic. I've not used it that way. Okay. You're right. Been loved what they're paying you with now is debt, so they're enslaving your future children to pay for it. If they take offense, it's because it's used in a dismissive. Yeah. Maybe it's the way it's used, like shut. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Saying stuff like that. Yeah, that's not cool. I agree with you that they're been loved. You got to be a little nuanced, right? I've not used it that way, so who knows? Yeah, it is. I said it sarcastically before. It's only theft if we hadn't had a contractual agreement with the state. Official blasphemy. About the social contract. I closed out all my other tabs so that the internet wouldn't. But shoot, if I could share it. Mises. It's from the Mises Institute. Lysander Spooner. And what was his treatise called again? No contract. I just had it open. But if you go in and read that, or even get a summation by watching a documentary based on it, there's no such thing as a social contract. I mean, I could sit here right now and kind of go through all what I use as the 4 questions that could kind of prove there's no such thing as even legitimate government. But yeah, I like I say, I would definitely use that as a resource. Like I say. Nah, I wouldn't even be able to find it right now. Yeah, I won't waste too much trying to look for it. But like I say, no treason, it's called. Lysander Spooner, no treason. Just type that into a search bar and the rest of the title will come up anyways. But like I say, Lysander Spooner, no treason. And you'll hear pretty articulated pushback against the pretense of the social contract. Okay. Like I say, nothing is new under the sun, even us modern libertarians. Now, we do have the fortune of having all these geniuses and access to their information or their dialogue or their literature, the novels they writ. We do have access to that, so we can tweak, some of these things modern day to be more reflective of the modern world we live in. But like I say, a lot of this stuff was figured out. I mean, even if you go all the way back to Aristotle, right? A lot of stuff that we're basically repeating today was well understood even a couple thousand years ago, or even just in most modern or more recent history in modern times is just a couple hundred years ago. This kind of information that I'm talking about as a libertarian was very much and well understood by a lot of people a couple hundred years ago. But through the education system, the complete dominance of the religion of the state now in the culture, all the important information has gone by the wayside for political propaganda and a narrative that maintains the growth of the state. It's a new religion is what it is. And with this new religion is it's dominating all the morals and ethics and understandings that, like I say, took many, many hundreds of years, centuries to figure out, but they were figured out. I'm not referring to you. Many times I've seen it used on social media. Negative context. Comply or die. Quite the contract. Yeah, exactly. Who would sign that one, right? Or even just the sheer fact that every 4 years you get a whole new, government, and they can come up with all new tax scams or schemes, right? It's like, yeah, I signed this. Even if you said like the person that was alive that drafted the Constitution, they signed the contract back then. Let's say everybody went around signed the contract. Well, we're hundreds of years later. The people that were alive that supposedly signed that contract are not the same people that are alive today. What are we just carrying through? And we just keep signing it every election blindly. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, whatever the government says. Yeah, I'm still in. Right? Not right. Who would ever sign a contract where it's like signing a blank check, right? Who would sign a blank check over to someone, right? Then you better trust that person with your life if you're going to sign over a blank check or a social contract, right? That they can just rewrite anytime they want. And even as they rewrite it, hey, signature's still there, right? No thanks. Yeah, I don't want nothing to do with that. The thieves over everything back to the people. It's all good. So you were going after the, oh Lord, who's going after the, don't even, what's with the, got to bring the like, where's this? Trying to see where this went. Come up with is to pick on seniors and they wonder. No idea who, I don't see anyone who brought up, I don't even see anyone that brought up Jewish people. I don't see any of that. Not sure what that even means. Maybe if someone that was arguing in the chat back and forth way long time ago. But yeah, okay, where are we at? 81. Old white trash. Oh wait. Oh, I got to go back up here a little bit. You're a snowflake. You're a snowflake. You get tax on taxing. A sin tax. Yeah. Okay, let me go back down here. Okay. We need to undo bank law that Pierre Trudeau passed that opened the door for international banks to come and charge compound interest or money borrowed by government. This is why Canada's debt. Is this argument for supposedly making the Bank of Canada public again? The Bank of Canada is publicly owned, right? It doesn't exist. Just like the Federal Reserve, everyone likes to pretend that it's, well, what it was when they set it up. The reason why they called it the Federal Reserve and pretended that it wasn't part of government is so that it could remain independent and not affected by the politics, right? Yeah, if you believe that one, I got some oceanfront property in Arizona, right? But all you have to look, like, don't go by by me, like, don't go by anyone's opinion. Just go look up what the Bank of Canada Act is. You can go right now. Just type in Bank of Canada Act. Read it from the history, from its inception till today. It only exists as an act of legislation, just like corporations, right? To be able to socialize your losses can only happen because your business is called a corporation, which is, once again, an act of legislation. Government created the central bank, just like in the U.S. It was an act of U.S. legislation that created the Federal Reserve Act. That's why it's called the Federal Reserve Act. So if you can bring it in through an act of legislation, well, you can end it through an act of legislation, which that's the problem. Is having central bank at all. No, I don't want it to be public, nor do I want it to be private. I don't go for this thing that the central bank should just be able to give out people loans because you're Canadian? What the hell does that mean? You should be able to get a loan based on a private institution that supposedly, if it's a proper bank, has reserves built up from other people that had their deposits in there, and they willingly loan that out to you as a loan. You agree to pay it in an actual contractual obligation at a particular amount of interest because people have to be paid. That owns that bank, or the people that are putting their savings in to be used as loans. The person that puts the money in as savings, well, they want to get an interest rate back on that. If I'm like me as a saver, and this used to be so easily understood, like when my parents were younger, is if I'm going to stash a bunch of money in a bank, what's the difference between putting it under or in a safe in my house or putting it in a bank? Well, one thing about the bank, well, there's two things, I guess. One is they usually have fairly secure vaults, really secure, I should say, vaults. And as an added bonus, they'll give me interest because they're going to use my money to lend out a portion of that to people that go in for loans. But because they're doing that, they're going to give me back a cut of whatever they get in terms of interest rates from the loan provision that they offer to someone else. So I get a benefit. So that means if we actually had interest rates, even with modern central banking, if we had interest rates that were properly reflective of a normal capitalist model, then you would actually have interest rates higher or in excess than inflation. So you would actually be gaining purchasing power by sheer fact that you were saving that money and it was increasing in value over time. Or even if you just benefit because of the increase in the interest rate. So if you're getting an interest rate from your bank of, when I was younger, it was like 4.5%, let's say. And let's say inflation is 2%, which is, it's higher than that. But if you're getting 4.5% and let's say inflation is 2%, then you're gaining like an extra 2.5%. So you are profiting. So no, I don't believe in that anyone should get free loans from a central bank, or that there should be such thing as a central bank to give people loans. No, banking is a very respectable institution if it's done properly. Not what we're currently functioning under today. I mean, the banks in Canada today, well, the central bank basically borrowed off the Federal Reserve and other central bank in the U.S., the International Monetary Fund, which is basically they get their money from all the central banks, right? And then the Bank of Canada basically recapitalized all the banksters. The banks in Canada, all 6 of the major banks in this country, or 3 of them, were basically insolvent. The rest were pretty much on the precipice. That they all got bailed out by central banking and big government having the ability to print that money to bail them out. So the reason why the cost of everything is so much higher is because of the fact that they bailed out housing market. The housing market, the bottom would have dropped completely out of it if the banks weren't bailed out by Stephen Harper under the Harper regime. As much as I'd love to blame that on Trudeau, no, that happened under the Harper regime. So Harper harmed a lot of millennials and Gen Xers too that want to buy homes. Those homes would be a whole lot cheaper today if the banking institutions in this country weren't completely bailed out. And that bailout, like, who do you think is going to pay for it? It's going to be the young people. It's going to be the millennials. It's going to be the Gen Zers because it's not being paid off anytime soon, right? You see the debts and deficits going down? No. So the younger people, those millennials that you pretend are so entitled, they're the ones that the older people that benefited from that central planning scheme, they're the ones that's going to pay the final cost. So yeah, that's quite, if you're a boomer, you got to take that into account. The millennials are really screwed as a consequence of the result of all this big government and central planning and central banks. So no, I'm not a fan of any central bank. I say end the very premise of having such thing as a central bank. That's my thoughts on it. Anyways, I'm probably going to tie this up because, yeah, I guess Tim said we're already going 3 hours. So, yeah, nope, not much point in going any longer than that. We'll save some for another day. I might have a few other things still left to say, but I think I can see it. Anyways, I'm just going through the comments here real quick. Make sure I haven't left anything out that's important. You sure don't? I would have some. I think everyone's just kind of talking back and forth to each other. All right, cool. All right, everyone, like I say, thanks for joining me in the stream. I'm going to get this all finished and tied up. And like I say, I'll reach out to Tim to have another conversation with him soon enough. And like I say, yeah, no more for me. Yeah, no more pussyfooting around the issue and try to cater or coddle people, because once again, a lot of them have shown me they're willing to cancel me out anyways, no matter what I do. So I'm just going to stick to what I usually do best, and what I've always done historically is just speak the unbridled truth and stop trying to cater to appeal to people. Because the more people I try to cater to or appeal to, it seems I'm losing more and more people, because it seems like I've spread myself a little bit too thin, and actually they're not even getting the real me. So yeah, I'm going to be the real me. I'm going to talk about the things the way they should be talked about. I'm going to be honest, forthright, and unapologetic in my absolute advocacy for individual liberty. I'm not going to make no excuse about it. And I'm hoping that whether you're liberal, conservative, or even a collectivist, I'm hoping, or any kind of a status, I'm hoping that you'll listen and hear what people like myself have to say and recognize and realize that it's not just about benefiting me. Trust me, liberty benefits everyone. I mean, except for, the maniacal authoritarians that want to sit upon their throne or their perch, right? But the overwhelming majority of us, we're all going to benefit from honesty, being forthright, and telling the truth about what the real world is that surrounds us and how we can get out from underneath this. Anyways, let me answer this because there's one more. Thank you very much. Good times for the donation. All right, so if that's it, which it looks like it is, I'm going to tie things up, and we'll see everyone in the next stream. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.